So I'd like to call this meeting to order, please, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would stand, please. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And if you would take the roll, please, Mr.
Oh, yes. Josh Fedor.
Present.
Steve Mundy.
Present.
Kathy Postlewaite.
Present.
Jocelyn Hinshaw.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Dale.
Quorum.
All right, Mr. Dale.
Yes. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the loss of our dear co-worker, Janice Stevanovic, passed away last week. She had been an employee, and a dedicated, strong employee for the town of Zionsville for the last 15 years. So she had a significant impact on what you're seeing tonight in terms of procedure, process. She had a significant role in plan review and project management for the town of Zionsville for many, many years. Very strong influence on how the town conducts business. But unfortunately, she passed away last week. And so we want to just acknowledge her, the importance that she had to the town, and ask for a moment of silence.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Dale. Next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our June 5th meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to look them over. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is petition number 2024-04-UV, and this petitioner has asked to withdraw this petition. So in order for us to do that, we will have to start with a suspension of the rules. Do I have a motion to suspend the rules?
I move to suspend the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fedor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And then we'll need a motion to withdraw petition number 2024-04-UV, use variance. Is there a motion to withdraw this petition?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henshaw. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. Thank you. Next item is docket number 2024-11-DSV. And this petitioner has asked for this to be continued until our next meeting. And so we will, in fact, continue this, and it will be on our meeting in August. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the continued business with docket number 2024-13-DSV. Edward Murray is the petitioner here. Representatives? Good, thank you. And we will start then with the staff report. Mr.
Yes,
Smith.
ma'am. Drew, if you could switch to the computer screen. That way I can share. So just so you're aware, we had some technical difficulties. So I don't actually have a PowerPoint for you tonight. So we're going to use the same information that's on your tablet. So I've opened up the staff report. You'll see that on your tablet. So this is a request for to exceed lot coverage for the construction of a new patio and a new garage. Mr. Andreoli is here representing the petitioners. To skip over to why this is required, Our zoning ordinance in this RSF2 zoning district only allows 20% lot coverage. After adding everything up, including the proposed garage and new patio, you turn out to be 24.15%. I know Mr. Andreoli sent, actually I think it was Barry sent over some new findings. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to partner this afternoon with Mike, but I'm sure you'll be providing those. That said, staff, we made our positioning based off the ones that were provided with the initial finding. We had no issues with the first two of the findings. Our positioning really focused on question 3, again, pertaining to unnecessary hardship. Summarizing what you're seeing on the screen, staff, again, has repeatedly said we don't believe hardship can be self-created. And in this case specifically, these additions aren't resulting from unique conditions like easements, flood issues, encroachments, things of that nature. It's just this desire by the petitioner to have additional space and a new garage. Because of that, we don't believe this meets or rises to the threshold needed to approve unnecessary hardship. So because of that, we offer an unfavorable recommendation, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there questions for staff?
The garage is detached, is that correct?
Let me
Or is it attached to the house?
pull up the plans here for you so you can see. Here's the here's the garage. So it'll be, appears a breezeway, I'll call it. You can see that on your screen.
There
Yes,
it
we
is.
can see it.
I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. Thank you.
The questions?
I lost my screen here. I'm not
Okay,
sure what
Mr. Andreoli. And just to be clear, our procedure with regard to the presentations are the petitioner is given 15 minutes to present. I'm just going over the rules of the road. Petitioners are granted 15 minutes to present their petition. Any remonstrators will have 15 minutes to make their comments, and then there is a 10-minute period following that for the petitioner to respond, and another 10-minute period following that for any remonstrators to speak. Mr. Andreoli, if you would give your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam President. For the record, Mike Andreoli, 1393 West Oak Street. I represent the petitioners in this particular matter seeking a variance. They have lived on this property in Oak Ridge since 2003. The house was built back in the 90s. They bought it in 2003 and have lived there since that period of time. They've raised their family there, and part of the reason that they're seeking this variance is their family is now getting older. They have a child now who's going to be driving, another one that's going to be soon after that, and they need additional garage space. Their preference is to go ahead and live at that property and not be forced to move and find another property. Generally, the residents in Oak Ridge, as most of the nicer subdivisions in town, park inside in their garages and generally don't park out in the driveway, certainly don't park out on the street. There's some covenants against that in Oak Ridge. So essentially what they're trying to do is be in line with what their neighbors expect of them and also create additional garage space. Since the staff report has come out, and our client apologizes for not being here, Mr. Revercombe of R&G is here, the builder. They're out of town and do not have very good cell service, but we were able in the last several days to talk with them about the fact that the requirement's 20%, we're now 24% with regard to propose. Is there anything we can do to try to modify that or lessen that as best we can? And so we were able to accomplish that and send a note to Jonathan this afternoon, obviously much too late for him to act on it, from a staff standpoint, but we were able to go ahead and agree that there's an existing, the staff report says existing wood deck. That's what the property tax records say. There's a deck there, but it's not wood now. That wood deck was replaced by concrete. Our client has agreed to remove that 372 square foot concrete deck and return it back to landscaping. And I suggested to him, if we're looking for a hardship argument, we need to put in what we need, but not any more than what we need. And if he puts in and seeks to put in an additional space that would include an additional outdoor patio, that would give him 2 patios. And I suggested that that probably wouldn't pass muster with the board. Because it would be hard to make a case that those were absolutely necessary. So he's agreed to remove that 372-foot concrete patio and get it out of there and return it to green space and landscaping. The actual proposed entertainment patio, we've reduced from 675 feet to 460 feet, agreed to reduce it to that number. If you do the math, and I've sent my computations on over to Jonathan, if you do the math, that puts us at 20.9%. It's still over 20, but it's as close as we could humanly do to get the garage, get at least some outdoor space by reducing it and eliminating the other patio. That is not their preference, but we understand the concerns that are being raised by the board these days as it relates to variances in the hardship requirement. We know there's a move afoot to try to deal with that, and I actually wrote a letter to the Plan Commission letting my thoughts be known about all of that, actually suggesting that the more they could leave it in your good hands, the better off we would be rather than strict standards, because of the job that the Board of Zoning Appeals has done so well over the years. Notwithstanding all of that, we're now at 20.9. I'd like to suggest humbly and respectfully, but perhaps that's in the margin of error, by reducing it as much as we can to something that we can use and what we feel like we need, but not any more than what we need. We hope that that would be enough to engender your support here tonight. He's talked to his neighbors. I don't think there's going to be any opposition to this here. We'll see. But we've sent out the letters and have heard none to date, nor have any letters of interest to our knowledge been submitted. So I would respectfully suggest that you grant approval for this tonight, given how low it is and the fact that we've taken all steps that we can to reduce it as much as we can. Hopefully that will be enough in your good offices that you'll be able to grant the approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andreoli. Are there questions for Mr. Andreoli and the petitioner?
Just to clarify, this patio that will be taken out of service, removed, the patio that they're going to remove, that's an existing patio? That's not part of the new
Mr.
patio?
Andreoli, I'm going to ask you to return to the mic, please. Thank you.
That is an existing patio, and so that was included in the lot coverage. So that now will be gone and will be removed. That's what allows us to get down closer to the 20%, and we reduce the size from 675 to 460 of the other outdoor space. That's the only outdoor space they will have, and we've reduced that further. His real goal, obviously, is to have some outdoor space, but really needs the garage
Of course.
for the cars. That's really what's driving this bus.
And this garage has living quarters above it, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
The garage has living quarters above it, is that correct?
The garage has, it's going to be his workspace. He now works 3 days a week remotely. He needs a better workspace. The current configuration of the house, that's got to be accessed through the bedroom and some other things. He needs a separate separate and distinct work areas. So that's going to be a work area. They are going to have, use it for guest space. If the board has some problems with that and suggests that they can't be used for guest space, just simply for his workspace, we will certainly commit and agree to that. But the bottom line is that was going to be the use of the upstairs area itself. He needs additional work area because he now works 3 days a week remotely.
So it will be heated and air conditioned and have water, and it could be space to be lived in, is that correct or not?
Yeah, I can't answer that, but Jess is shaking his head. It would have all of those facilities. Jess, will it have a bathroom?
Yes,
Okay. So we'll have a bathroom, and we'll be able to be accessed from that particular upstairs to that particular bathroom.
The last thing I'll ask, and this is not a scolding, but you're a frequent person here that represents petitioners, and the definition that you've given, or the undue hardship, is no hardship whatsoever. And if that would serve as the as stating an undue hardship, we'd have every petition would have that on it. But the needed improvement cannot be made without the increase of lot coverage due to its location and size does not represent any kind of hardship.
Well, I guess it's going to depend ultimately on your definition and your interpretation of all of that, and that's certainly within your purview. I put in my findings, and let me read them to you because I don't know if you have the up-to-date version.
Well, that's in your findings, at least the one we have.
So staff does not agree with the finding was,
The updated
needed
findings
approval-
are on your
Pardon?
TV screen as well.
there it is right up there.
Oh, wow.
Says the needed improvement cannot be made without the increase in lot coverage. The applicant's current garage space is insufficient for their vehicles. Husband drives a truck, wife drives an SUV, and they do not fit in the existing place at the same time. Further, the party's oldest son will be driving a year from now, and additional garage space will be needed for additional vehicles. Oak Ridge prefers that most vehicles be garaged. In deference to the neighbors, they would prefer to have all their vehicles enclosed in the evening. Further, the applicant's current home is entirely too small and only accessible through the master bedroom. Mr. Murray works from home 3 days a week. Space above the garage would be used for more separate workspace, as well as a guest room when needed. While the parties could try to find a different home in Zionsville, they've lived in Oak Ridge, as I've mentioned, for a considerable period of time, and they love their neighborhood and loves the neighborhood themselves. So the bottom line is, your application is the strict terms of the zoning ordinance will result in unnecessary hardships in the use of the property.
And this makes a little more sense to us as a possibility of an unnecessary hardship, but what was submitted initially and what we had until we got here tonight did not.
Right.
No, I understand. That's why
Right.
that's why I went ahead and redid the findings to try to present some additional information so that you had some idea of what the problem was
Right.
confronting this family in terms
Right.
of trying to get an improvement on their property.
Okay. Thank you, thank you, Mr. Andreoli. I don't know if we have any, are there any remonstrators here? Anyone who would like to speak about this petition? Anyone online? No? Okay. Any other questions for the petitioner or discussion?
What are the specific neighborhood rules? They can't park on the street, and they prefer to have all the cars parked in the garage at night, but that's not a rule specifically. Stop. Not close enough.
I think they suggest that all family access has to park on the driveway or in the garage. Obviously, if you have guests over and there's parking on most of our town streets, if there's guests and those types of things, so it doesn't prohibit parking. I want to make sure that, make clear of that. But it strongly suggests, maybe even impose a requirement that for the owners themselves, they should not park on the street, just like they can't park SUVs, those types of things. So they've had fairly strict covenants with regard to that. Doesn't prohibit parking on the street totally, and if they had guests, those types of things on a temporary basis wouldn't be a problem. I think the goal was to try to make sure that on a day-to-day basis, people were not leaving their cars out and were actually in the garages, and they had sufficient garage spaces. As you know, the homes in Oak Ridge generally over the years have been changed and modified and additional improvements made to them, but most of them are in their original condition because they're fairly large homes.
Thank you, Mr. Andreoli. Additional, for my own part, I'm appreciative of the amount of pruning that has happened here in order to be as close to the maximum permitted as possible.
Yeah, that's a hard garage to get out of regardless. And if you have another car in the driveway, I do think it's probably hard to get out, back around safely and get back out. So even if it were extra pavement, you're probably at 20, right? So.
And even with a standard size vehicle, what's marketed as a two-car garage is just barely tight enough for a two-car garage. There's not much else space in there, so. I can understand it, and I too appreciate them working to try to get this number as close as possible.
Are we ready to make a decision? More discussion required?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I move that docket number 2014-13-DSV development standard variance to exceed the maximum lot coverage for property at 4921 Willow Ridge Court be approved as presented with modifications to reduce the lot coverage to 20.9% based on the staff report and the submitted findings of fact, and in substantial compliance with the submitted site plans with the modifications formerly noted.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. We have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henshaw. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. Very good. Thank you. Good luck with your project. Appreciate your modifications. We good?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just say, it'll probably be next week, Mike, before I get you the official approval documentation. It'll probably be next week before I get you the paperwork, the approval paperwork. Maybe. Hey. Thank you.
Okay.
Are we ready?
I need to give you all these findings to sign.
All right.
All right.
Good.
Jonathan, while we're doing that, I have no screen, common screen that the others have. Is there a reason for that?
I did not realize you had no screen.
I have no slack, I'm afraid.
I can look off
He's
with
got
the
an
neighbor,
iPad, he
but
just doesn't have.
when you said it's on the screen, it's either behind me or it's at one of my neighbors.
We will look in, I don't know the solution for tonight's meeting, but we will look into it. Hopefully, we can get that problem resolved with IT for the next meeting. Does that
Thank
sound
you.
good?
Yeah. All right, the next item on our agenda, new business, is docket number 2024-24-SE. Larry Summers, a special exception. Is Mr. Summers in the room? Or representative?
I believe he may be remote. Oh, no, there you go. There you go. Never mind.
All right, good, thank you. We'll start with the staff report, please. Mr.
Yes,
Smith?
ma'am. Hold on 1 second here. So this is a special exception. The petitioner is proposing a minor residential subdivision because, well, normally these would go through, minor subdivisions would go through Plan Commission, but because of the zoning, being zoned RE, our section 194082, the authorized uses table, shows that a special exception is required for this minor subdivision. So that is why it's here, to get approval of a special exception for the minor subdivision. The proposal, if I can pull up the initial filing. The proposal is for 3 lots. You'll have 2 smaller 3-acre parcels, if you can, with the exception of Steve, if you can look on your screen, you'll see the 3 small parcels that were, essentially it's just outlining the 2 existing residential homes that are already on site. And then you have a remaining 58-acre tract, which is going to be lot 3. And so they're coming, seeking approval for the special exception. Here is staff's positioning regarding the 3 questions. We believe they do meet the criteria for approving this request, and therefore we offer a favorable recommendation. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there questions for staff? I do have one question for you, Mr. Smith. If you would clarify, given that one of those lots is very large, 58 acres,
Yes, ma'am.
could you clarify what steps would be required for that particular parcel to be subdivided?
Yeah, so they would have to do one of 2 things. They would have to rezone it to accommodate any farther residential development. So rezone it to a zoning classification that allows for a subdivision by right. That would not be through you. That would be through the Plan Commission and the Town Council. The other option is to come back before you guys as well for a minor residential subdivision. Keep the zoning the same. Just have to come back again to to divide that farther up from 58 acres to something
That would
smaller.
still be consistent with the RE zoning in that area. Is that what you mean?
Depending on how many lots, obviously we did our review with 3 parcels in mind. I reserve the right to have a different opinion if he comes through and wants to put in 51-acre lots. I reserve the right to have a different point of view because that might not align with the RE zoning district. Obviously, we'll be looking at a completely different set of criteria if he wants to do a rezoning. And then again, it'll be a different body and a different group. But those are your 2 avenues.
Okay. Thank
It's
you,
not
Mr.
that he
Smith.
absolutely cannot do anything with that 3rd lot, but there's 2 different paths that he would have to go through, both of which would be a public noticing forum and would require public noticing. And I know there was concerns about a major subdivision going into that parcel and preserving the RE zoning district and the land and all that. So any further subdividing, there will be some version of a public hearing. It just depends on which path they choose.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
I would like to add, though, I think there's a possibility that if they were to further subdivide Lot 3, if that would trigger as a major subdivision.
Yeah, depending on the number of lots.
Okay, which would require rezoning.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah.
If they wanted to do just a minor, take that 58 acres and divide it into 3 parcels, whatever that looks like, that would be a minor residential subdivision in the RE zoning district, which is exactly what you're looking at here, right? So that type of request would come right back to you. If it's what Mike's describing, where it's a major subdivision, that's not allowed through BZA. That would require rezoning to the appropriate zoning classification, and then that would be Plan Commission and Town Council.
Right. Good.
So
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Is Mr. Summers here to speak? Would you come up to the podium, please, and give your name and address?
you want me to comment?
If
or-
you give your name and address?
Oh, Larry Summers, excuse me, 5632 Eagle Oaks Lane, Zionsville.
Okay. Anything that you would offer about this petition? Any information you could give us that we don't have?
I don't think so. We're trying to comply with the requirements. I'm actually donating the property to two charities, so I'm not looking at this for profitable reasons, and what they do with it from there is sell it to somebody that wants to put to better use.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Summers. Are there any questions?
I would add
Yes.
that I know you don't like to develop farm ground. This is not really the best farm ground. It is cut up into about 4 tracks for farming. So I don't, and I lost the farmer last year who retired, so, so I don't blame him.
Yeah. All right, any questions for Mr. Summers?
Mr. Summers, you're aware, I assume that the charities would need to be aware that the right to farm under this zoning is still required for someone who wishes to buy the lot and build there.
Right.
Anything else for Mr. Summers? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Summers. Do we have anybody, any remonstrators, anyone who would like to speak about this petition, or do we have anyone online? No? Thoughts?
Agree with staff.
Yeah. We ready to make a motion?
Yeah. let me find it here. Make sure I'm looking at the right one here, just a second. I move the docket 2024-24-SE special exemption to permit a minor residential plat consisting of 3 or fewer lots at 7860 South, County Road 850 East be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report, staff recommendations, and submitted findings of facts.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good, thank you. The docket number is approved. The special exception is approved. Thank you, Mr. Summers. Are we good? Mr. Smith?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, the next item on our agenda is docket number 2024-27-SE, a special exception, Knoll property. Is someone here representing Mr. Knoll? Good, thank you. We have the staff report, please.
Yes, ma'am. So this is another special exception. You'll see on the TV screen another cutout of Table 2 from Section 194082. Single-family dwelling is a special exception in the Ag zoning district. To tie into what Steve said about the previous petition, this will require a right to farm. So that's also included in the staff report. Regarding the comp plan, I'll scroll down here so you can see it on the screen. It recommends ag, which we believe allows for limited residential use in certain situations. We believe this complies with that. And going through the questions on the findings of fact document, we believe they meet all of the necessary thresholds. And so therefore, we offer a favorable recommendation. If you have any specific questions, happy to answer them.
In your analysis here, it references, in the comp plan, it references the city of Lebanon as far as growth out from Lebanon. Is that because this is adopted comp plan from the annexation from
Yeah,
what
so
township?
what we did is as we were I don't want to say annexing, as we were
Or,
bringing in and taking over administrative duties for the different townships, rather than which we're in the process of updating our comp plan, so hopefully things will be much better going forward. But At the time, they just adopted the current, whatever municipal jurisdiction had and kind of morphed it all together, so there it is. Would I like to see it improved? Yes. Would I like that to be eliminated?
Sounds like it's in the process.
But it's in the process, yeah.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
One last question, that I drive by this property daily. The sign, public notice sign that was posted out there, is that posted by staff or is that posted by the petitioner?
Well, it's the petitioner. Usually it's the owner, the property owner.
Okay.
I don't want to say the petitioner because oftentimes they have attorneys or somebody who's the petitioner.
Okay. And the only reason I ask is because side ditches out there have not, some of them have not been mowed. 2 or 3 weeks ago when the sign was put in, you could see it. Now it's grown up with grass above it and it's just,
Yeah.
I think there should be a better way of doing it. I'm not sure what it is, but
Yeah. Well,
just an
let Mike and
observation I've
I,
noticed.
let Mike and I talk about it later, probably next week, and we'll let you know what comes of it. I'll
It's
say
just
just,
an like I said, it's an
yeah,
observation
just
I noticed
historically,
on
it's
this.
been done by the petitioner. I'm not going to say that I'm opposed to putting them out there, but we'll talk about it and let you know.
Okay.
So,
All right, further questions for staff? Mr. Knoll? If you would give your name and address for the record, please.
Scott Knoll, 6802 West 96th Street in Zionsville.
Okay. Anything else that you can tell us about this petition, your plans for this property?
Yeah, we're just, it's a 12-acre parcel, and we're just going to build a family house there, so move my wife and 5 kids up to the new parcel. That's the intent.
You understand about the right to farm commitment that you would be making with regard to activities on either side of that piece of property with regard to farming and so on? Okay.
Yep.
You'd be willing to sign off on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
could be
Questions?
wrong, but I believe you've already signed it,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yep.
Questions for Mr. Knoll about this petition? No? We're ready to make a motion?
I move the docket 2024-27-SC special exception to permit the use of a single-family resident at 1701 South 650 East be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations and the submitted findings of fact.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Good luck with your project. Okay. Looks like the next item on our agenda is docket number 2024-19-DSV. That's Harris FLP, with a number of development standards variances. Is the petitioner here this evening? Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Smith, if you'd give us a staff report, please.
As you mentioned, this is a development standards variance request, 2 sections specifically. You'll see them on your TV screen. 4 total variances are requested. 1 is to eliminate foundation plantings. 2 is to eliminate the 6-foot parking lot perimeter planting strip. The 3rd is to reduce the required buffer yard G along the south property line. And in specifically to that requirement, I believe the petitioner has a commitment that they're going to offer forward, and they can provide more details on that. The 4th request is to provide for landscaping in an easement along the east property line. The zoning is general business. This is actually Outlot J, I believe, of Appaloosa Crossing, if you're familiar with that, that development. Here are the development standards that I was just referencing. You'll see them listed on your staff report if you want to look over those three, or look over those four. To jump right into staff positioning, without going through all four specifically, I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have, but generally speaking, our positioning was pretty consistent across all four requests. And from a staff point of view, we're offering an unfavorable recommendation for really a couple of reasons. One of which would be the zoning ordinance, right? That was a pretty, the zoning ordinance hasn't changed. And we knew the size of the property going into the development. And knowing the zoning rules and knowing the size of the property, the project was still designed to need 4 variances. And again, to repeat what we've said numerous times here, we do not believe hardships should be self-created. And staff believes the site was overbuilt. We knew the rules going into it. We knew the size of the land as we were designing the project. And the project was still designed in a way that needed these requests. And so again, happy to answer any specific questions about any of the 4 specific variances needed. But across the board, staff is offering an unfavorable recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there questions for Mr. Smith?
I have a question. Are there any differences between what's been asked for here in variance 1 and 2 from what has been approved in the past for the other outlots that have been built upon now?
Yeah, I don't, maybe slightly, but I'm going to say no. I think they're the same requests that have been granted to other petitions in this development.
Other questions? Mr. Price, you've anticipated. You want to give your name and address for the record, please?
Certainly. For the record, my name is Matt Price. I'm an attorney with Denton's at 10 West Market Street in Indianapolis and represent Harris FLP. And with me tonight, I have the general partner and principal of Harris FLP, Bob Harris, our civil engineer, Greg Snelling, and then also Suzanne Baker from my office. And I hadn't planned on starting the presentation this way, but I think I will pick up on a little bit on what Mr. Monday said. The variances being sought here are completely consistent with and virtually identical to the variances that have been sought and obtained along the frontage with Michigan Road over the last half dozen years. And that was not done without a great deal of examination and consideration about the various factors, including whether the petitioner could establish that there is, in fact, a hardship. And after analyzing that, in each instance, there was a finding that, in fact, there was a hardship. And it has to do with the history of the property and as well as some changes in circumstances and conditions relating to the property that support that requisite finding. I'll explain that in more detail, but I want to provide, first of all, just an overall view of the property because I think will help illuminate how those decisions have been made in the past and why we think they're justified in this case as well. If I could go to that first slide. This is an overview of the property at the southeast corner of County Road 300 or 146th Street and Michigan Road. And the area outlined in black is both Outlot J as well as a common area where we have detention or water facility. That detention area or common area was acquired in 2020 and added to the project. We bought it from the adjoining residential neighbor to the south. It continues to have its R2 zoning classification, and the property immediately north, what we call Outlot J today, where the proposed shopping center would be located, it's zoned general business. And it was zoned general business last year by the Zionsville Town Council after we presented a site plan and building elevation substantially similar to what we're presenting tonight. Just to give you some context with regard to these similar variances, the Chase Bank, the initial shopping center development, which is at the north end of the project and kind of got this process started, the Culvers and this proposal have all sought, and in the case of the properties that are developed, obtained these similar variances with a couple of modifications which I can explain. If you go to the next slide. This is an identification of the proposed commercial building, which is made up of individual tenant locations for businesses. We anticipate that it'll be predominantly restaurants, breakfast and lunch orientation, a dinner spot, as well as kind of a quasi medical kind of use. The idea was, when we got this property rezoned, is that this would be an ideal location for those uses that are permitted in the general business zoning district, but are less intense than some of the other outlots that you see further north that are more traditional commercial. And that's in response to really the changing character of this area. When the property was initially rezoned back in 2008, it was contemplated to be what we would call a power center. A Kroger, over 125,000 square feet, Anchor, very large parking field. The southern 1/3 of the property was anticipated to be office space. And so after it was rezoned and after we went through the recession and really on the eve of COVID, we sought to modernize and update those zoning commitments that were related to the initial rezoning, primarily in response to the changing character of the area. It was becoming more residential in nature, and this really wasn't going to be that intense commercial hub that it originally had been planned for, not only by Mr. Harris, but by the community at large, been shown as that kind of an intense development on comprehensive plans dating back multiple decades. And so what we did is modify the commitments to really change it into a mixed-use development that includes the residential townhomes and then shops and restaurants that cater to the surrounding vicinity. In 2010, this property was brought into Zionsville through our consolidation. It was originally rezoned in Boone County, and as part of that, made the property subject to some additional development standards that originally weren't applicable to the property, including, for example, the requirement for perimeter pathways that are required under Zionsville zoning ordinance, which also is very consistent with the evolution of this property. The addition of pedestrian access, bicycle access to these local businesses is a key part of the way the property is being developed and where the marketplace is with regard to this property. To give you some idea of how serious those changes have become, yesterday the town of Zionsville issued a little over $3.5 million in bonds to pay for pedestrian connections that go from this outlot all the way down to Willow Road. The idea being that individuals could go up north on Michigan Road safely, access these restaurants and other offerings, and enjoy them as amenities. And so that change in circumstances and conditions has changed the nature of the development. And when you change the nature of the development, that impacts the way these buildings can be designed and utilized.
Sorry, I'm struggling.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm struggling to make the connection between what you're describing and why you can't put plants along the foundation of the buildings.
I'll get to that
Okay,
point. I'm almost there.
okay.
Sometimes you have a longer wind up before you get to the pitch, but I'll go to the next
How
slide.
to make a watch.
Yeah.
What time it is.
Yeah, so that's a Price family trait, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
So it's an excellent segue, though, into our next point, which is that part of what we've tried to do is build buildings where you have outdoor dining opportunities, walk-up customer service where you can use a sidewalk, access the business from the pathway back to the store, our design elements have included the use of awnings, which are permitted under the overlay zone architectural requirements, in fact encouraged. Mr. Harris has gone to great lengths to adapt his designs to reflect the equestrian history of the property, his own family history with the property, as far as having a barn with similar architectural features as these buildings. In fact, it's called in our declaration the Appaloosa theme, which the Plan Commission in Zionsville has bought into, and in fact insists upon now when we come forward with development plans. So when we incorporate those awnings, one of the things we pointed out with our initial shopping center building was that foundation plantings are not viable underneath an awning. And that awning is necessary in order to have customers access the individual storefronts safely on a sidewalk, covered from the weather when they enter the individual small-scale stores that occupy these buildings. And so what we're not proposing to do is to say we're not having any plantings. What we're saying is we want to substitute foundation plantings, the viability of which is highly questionable underneath an awning, and provide for plantings where we have openings, as we're showing on our plan, together with flower boxes. To the extent that we cannot fit in all the required plantings that would otherwise be required by the foundation planning rules, we provide those in other locations on the property. And that's one thing that's a theme throughout all of our proposals up and down Michigan Road. It's never been a reduction in the overall number of plantings. It's just where those plantings are located, and located in such a way that they have viability going forward. If you go to the next slide. The other consistent theme, and this relates very much to the perimeter, the parking lot perimeter landscaping variance request, is that there was some sense by prior boards in reviewing this property that there had been an additive effect over the years of acquiring right-of-way, the state of Indiana, utilities, serving not this property, but serving the community at large. And so over time, this property has given way to increased acquisition of right-of-way, increased acquisition of space for utilities, the requirement, once they were incorporated into Zionsville, for locating a perimeter pathway within right-of-way that was outside of the state right-of-way. And so the thought process was that requiring yet another 6-foot strip in addition to the 30-foot landscape buffer that we're already providing was excessive, particularly where the petitioner was offering to relocate plantings on other places on the property that would be well suited for adding additional landscaping, including the property on the east side of our building. And so this gives you an example of those right-of-way widths that exist today, and how they interrelate to the face of our building on the north end. And that's been consistent all the way down the Michigan Road frontage. And each one of the buildings has obtained this exact same variance, including a prior proposal on this very parcel just a couple of years ago. If you go to the next slide. This gives you a little idea of kind of what our design elements look like in practice. So this shows the northern building with the awnings, and it shows that we have the landscaping in front of the building rather than underneath up against the foundation itself. If you go to the next slide. This shows the continuous pathway as you're looking north-south along the frontage of the property. And again, we do have extensive landscaping between the parking lot and the pathway. We're just seeking relief from the requirement for an additional 6 feet given the history of the property. And then go to the next slide. This shows the view looking north towards the new Chase Bank. And then the picture on the right shows the existing buffering on the east side of Outlot J, which is this parcel. You go to the next slide. That's That is the two variances that relate to the overlay zone requirements. We have two other variances which I want to touch upon, which is with regard to the buffer yard G, all we're seeking to do is relocate that buffer yard from the southern end of our outlot J between the common area and our building and move that buffer yard to the east so that it's actually buffering the residential structure to our south. So we're not seeking to eliminate a buffer yard G, but just relocate it to the south property line. The idea being that the goal here, and we think the intent of the ordinance, is not to screen our common area, but rather it's to screen the residential use to the south. When we incorporate that common area into our overall proposal, we actually provide for very extensive separation between this land use and the residential property to our south, which was part of the intent of acquiring that property. And then lastly, there's a provision, I don't ordinarily think of it as a development standard or a matter subject to variances, which states that while you can include easement areas within buffer yard widths, you cannot, or the director cannot give a waiver to locate plantings within easements. And that has always been understood by our development team that it means that the director can't allow a private developer to put plantings in somebody else's easement, into that easement holder's possessory interest. And so the way you solve that problem is you get a consent to plant the trees or bushes within the easement. In fact, it's done all over Appaloosa, never been required to seek a variance in the past, including our neighbor to the north, Culver's, has trees and plants in the exact same easement that we're being asked to seek a variance from. We were happy to do that. We think that it actually ought to be encouraged where the individual easement holder consents to it, because it's very useful space that can be used to screen adjoining uses. Like in this case, it screens this use from the adjoining residential uses to our east. So as long as the easement holder, in this case Trico, has no objection, and they do not, they've given us that in writing. In fact, within 24 hours tendered us an agreement, because they've got it reduced to a fairly standard template when they get requests of this nature. When we were asked to obtain that consent, we were happy to do it. Trico answered almost instantaneously. So we think that's a very commonplace thing. The request for a variance is unusual, but we were confident that it made sense in this case.
So, sorry to interrupt, but did they ever have to access that easement in a destructive way? It's not like a right-of-way. I mean, they would, if it were necessary, they would be taking down your plants and so on, and then what would happen then?
They would. And so part of their agreement with the individual party seeking to locate in their easement is that we would be responsible for replacing that vegetation. And they also have some restrictions on the nature of the vegetation, because they don't want anything that would be harmful to their improvements. But it works very well with Zionsville's zoning ordinance and planning requirements. So we would like to maintain the consistency of our development. This is a critical project in order to complete the project. We have tenants ready to go into this space today. We believe that the evolving conditions surrounding this property have influenced its design, and that hardship does exist here by virtue of those evolving conditions and changes in the area that makes sense to grant some limited relief in order to allow the project to go forward, provided that, and this is a big thing, provided that the plantings, the overall plantings, are not reduced, but just simply relocated elsewhere on the site.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Any questions for petitioner about these?
I have a question about the area south of Lot J. It will have or does have a detention pond, is that correct?
Right, it has a water feature inside it today, yes.
And so the the planning that you're proposing would be between the pond, the detention pond, and the boundary with the Lot J. Is that
Correct.
correct? And
Correct.
would it be the same kind of required landscaping in that area?
Correct. That's exactly right. Yes. And what the ordinance does provide, and we've been working with the plan reviewer for the town, is it also provides that we can utilize the property on the north side of that shared property line with a single-family dwelling owner. We can utilize that common area to expand that to include that area in our buffer, which is what we're doing. We're seeking to maximize the screening between that property owner and ourselves.
And this project originally was rezoned by Boone County in 2008?
2008, that's right.
Okay.
Further questions?
And you said you do have the agreement with Trico on use of that easement property for landscaping?
We do in two forms. One is it's a common request, and so their executive director responded immediately and said they didn't have any problem with it. So gave us that in an email and then followed up with with their encroachment agreement, which we're happy to complete and return to them. I think the staff report makes that a condition if we go that route, and we're certainly agreeable to that condition.
So just to be clear, you're talking about not wanting to put plantings under what you're calling the awning. I would call it an arcade, maybe, or a portico, because it's not fabric, it's constructed, am I right? In front of the, okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
you're not,
it's the overhang, yeah.
so
Yeah.
you're not wanting to put plants under there because you believe they will not thrive there? That's a
Correct.
west face, am I right?
That is a western face, correct?
Yeah.
And afternoon sun, they may do better than you think, but I won't argue.
If they were irrigated, they'd be fine.
They'd be fine. Yeah.
It's not that you can't.
Yeah.
You want the arcade, right?
Yeah.
We
They-
do,
they
yeah.
would do fine.
For functional reasons, certainly, we want the cover for people, yes.
Yeah, well, but I mean, okay, but that's not to say that you would necessarily have the whole area be plants, but you might have some plantings along the, where the building and the sidewalk intersect.
That's right.
So that you might have beds there and a door and so on. Are you just going to have no plants there, or you're going to have window boxes or boxes there that will be movable? Or what's the intention there for that?
Yeah, so I think you articulated very well the plan to have, where we have spaces available to provide the landscaping where it adjoins the sidewalks, but not in the way where somebody needs to walk. We would maintain those plantings. And then we would have window boxes elsewhere to fill in the areas where there needs to be some additional greenery.
Okay, and then if I remember what you have said in your petition, then the issue on the north side and the south side along the building are simply because of traffic? Is that right? I mean, the plantings would be along the foundations, not only in the front, but are there not plantings on the other sides of the buildings? And those are not to happen because?
Yeah, we're just moving those location of those plantings around the north and the south side.
Moving the location changes the effect,
Yeah.
though, right? Those are big, hard, completely empty faces now that you can see from the road that are just building pavement on one end. You have the buffer pretty close, but the other hand, that is a big gap between where the buffer is and the building face.
On the north side?
On the south side,
Oh, on the south side?
yeah.
Right.
That's a lot of pavement, and then that is a detention pond, right? That the
Right.
level goes up and down, and it's a very deep one.
Right.
So it's not gonna, you can
Well-
call it a water feature, but it's not the
Right.
prettiest thing.
Right.
So-
One of the things that the conversations we've had with the plan reviewer, who kind of dissects the application of the buffer yard G rules, is some additional augmentation of plantings to get up to the plant count that we need to have. there's some confusion over the multiplier that's in the table, and it's fairly complex. And so I do anticipate that particularly on the southern end of the north side of that detention pond, there will be additional trees planted there as well. But we'll be 100% compliant with the tree counts for buffer yard G. It'll just be the location of the majority of the plantings will be along the south property line.
But you also say that additionally, the area in front and the south side will be used for outdoor restaurant seating, and foundation plantings would obstruct this permitted use. Additionally, the north side, requiring foundation plantings, would obstruct the drive aisle. And the owner contemplates exterior flower boxes in lieu of foundation plantings to provide functional screening consistent with the permitted restaurant uses. But the area that would obstruct the drive aisle, you're certainly not going to put flower boxes there. There will be no plantings there. Is that right? This is on the north side of the building.
There are plantings up in the northeast corner of the building along that drive contemplated. Really, wherever we have an open spot, there are trees and bushes being planted because we have so much plant material. This will be the most heavily landscape lot in the development, precisely because we are located adjacent to the R2 district to our south. It's what's driving the number of plantings up.
Further questions, Mr. Price?
I'm not sure now that I understand that open lot, which will be the south end of, the plantings will all be to the south side of that so that they are near the property line with the residents next door. There will not be any planting between the building itself and the detention pond, is that correct?
There'll be both, because there's additional plantings in order to hit the planting matrix ratios, which are fairly complex. You can only fit so many in along the southern property line with our residential owner. There'll be other plantings also on the north side of that detention pond.
You're not showing any here on your schematic.
And that was, what I'm referring to there is that the plan reviewer has indicated that there will need to be some additional plants placed there to get to our count requirement. So I think that was the commitment that Jonathan was referencing, is that we're committing to meet those minimum planting requirements.
Yeah, and if it's easier, again, Steve, unfortunately, I can put it on the TV screen behind you. You can see the landscaping plan if you want to take a look at it. And I can show you
Nothing there shown.
what is proposed. And as Mr. Price was, as Mr. Price was saying, there was, I'm going to say confusion or a discussion about the multiplier in the table, in the landscaping table. And I think what that's going to result in is there will be some modification to the landscape plan, but I don't think it's going to be a reduction in those plants. It's going to add plantings. So what you see here will not be reduced. There will be additional plantings added to. So if you're okay with what you see here, then you're going to be even happier with the end result because of the multiplier discussion that he mentioned. But if you'll look over here to the, well, I was hoping I could highlight that, but that's not going to highlight. On the left side of the TV screen here where my mouse is at, that is what they're referring to as relocating the plantings to the other side of the pond. And then there are currently shown a few plantings, specifically up here. And then again, depending on how the discussion goes with the multiplier, there will be more added where they can put them, if that helps.
Yeah, I just have concerns that, because those trees could get wiped out and you're back to little, twigs and things instead of getting some nice big mature trees that will stay permanently and help scale this big building next to residential.
Right,
And we don't know how many some is, right?
Right.
Without a commitment of what will go between the building and that detention pond.
Yeah, and what I will say is we're not, on this entire buffer yard G, we're not shortchanging the number of plantings or the size of those plantings. I mean, we meet we meet those standards. To satisfy the multiplier, what I understand is going to occur is towards the western property line, kind of the parking lot area, and then as you go further east, you're going to see that filled in with additional plant material to meet that multiplier. And we would have, and we do have an association of property owners that pays dues to maintain our common area real estate, or our common area landscaping, and so that is something that if something dies or material needs to be replaced, it's done so very promptly. And the best evidence of that is if you go out there today, you can see that where that, in the rare event where that's happened so far, items have been taken care of very quickly.
Help. So I'm Greg Snelling, civil engineer, Snelling Engineering at 13295 Illinois Street, Carmel. I could share a few numbers that Renee, that the town engineer, contract engineer, and I had discussed to meet the south buffer yard. I think you mentioned west property. To my knowledge, we would be adding 9 more trees and 7 more shrubs to the south that would wrap around the corners of the pond. And 2 more trees along the north side is what we would do to comply with the overall numbers based on our conversations. And that was based on a confusion from the multiplier in the table in the zoning ordinance.
So that's in addition to what we're seeing here on
Yes.
this schematic?
Yes.
Okay, so those are on top of what we can
Yes.
see here.
There's also an easement that runs along the south side of this property that is a pond maintenance easement. That is why that property does not show much landscaping, because there was discussion with the town engineer and staff that whether or not it was appropriate, because it was a unique easement, and there was really not a definition of that easement in the covenants, I believe, a specific one. So we have limited landscaping in that, but I believe Mr. Harris is willing to add landscaping between the pond and the building if necessary, but we were told basically to limit it because it was an easement. In other words, moving it to the south in a more appropriate location. That helps.
It feels self-inflicted. If the building were a little smaller, there were a little less parking, everything goes where it was required to, right, in the zoning. So it's hard to see how the site caused the hardship itself and how you didn't do that by deciding on the building size.
Mr. Harris can speak to the building size, but this is the size we need in order to make the project work from a viability standpoint. The alternative for us is to come in with a traditional outlot design, which we believe is contrary to the representations made during the rezoning, which is we were trying to strive for business offerings that have that kind of quasi-professional use, restaurant spots, not use it for another quick-serve restaurant type use that may strictly meet the buffering requirements, be a smaller structure, but also have a much greater impact to the south. And so this was the way we tried to reach that compromise without reducing the buffer yard G at all as far as the number of plantings along that property line. In fact, the separation between that dwelling and ourselves is significantly larger than the buffer yard's minimum requirement. And that property owner really worked with us in terms of buying that property in part because of this very concept.
Are we close to knowing what we want to do?
I have a question.
Sure, Mr. Gill.
With regard to the buffer yard G along the south property line, or as proposed, it would be on the south side of the retention pond. Do you have a commitment in any form or fashion that would, from the, I guess, the HOA or the Business Owner Association, that they'll commit to maintaining that and replacing it as necessary?
we're making that commitment here today, and Mr. Harris is in control of the declaration by virtue of being the owner of the development.
Okay, so would that be something that is recorded? Would that be a recorded commitment, or, I'm just thinking about over, who knows, 10, 20 years from now, you know, and that landscaping needs to be maybe replaced or upgraded, or, you know, what does the town have the necessary leverage to require the Business Owners Association to do that work?
Yeah, we could certainly provide that written commitment on the town's standard form and have it approved by council.
Okay, thank you.
I think for my own part, it would, when you, the discussion about the flower boxes is a little bit nebulous. We're not going to do the foundation plantings, but instead we're going to do flower boxes and, yeah. And so we are to take it on trust that these will be perhaps not equivalent to the foundation plantings that the ordinance requires, but something that would be passable or acceptable as such. So I don't know whether others feel the same way I do, but that's sort of a nebulous sort of commitment, I guess. So it may be unimportant, but
I would have liked to see that specifically on the
Yeah, I
detention
think we,
pond side. You could have put trees and pits right in that pavement and still had restaurants and spaces. It seems like you went to the exact minimum to the shrub that you could. And so it would have been nice to see the extra in order to.
I have a question, kind of, this is, I guess for staff, when it comes to foundation plantings, basically the way we looked at this was, if we have doors, I mean, if we went strictly by the ordinance, we would have a strip of foundation planting around the entire building and no way to get to a tenant space. So we've opened it up at everywhere there's a door along the front. So that, I mean, I guess, I don't know how you have a retail building and have a strip of foundation planting without.
well, I mean,
without
I think
openings.
it's intuitive that there would be a doorway. I don't know that anybody intended for the foundation planting to be.
We have 8 doors that are 10 feet wide, so there's 80 feet of where you couldn't put foundation plantings.
And what's the
by
total,
default,
what's
so.
the total elevation of that side where the doors are? What's the total length of that side?
I don't know that, I don't know the answer to
Okay,
that.
so you have 80 feet of doors, but what's the total span of that building?
I don't know.
Oh.
I'd have to have a scale, but I'm not the architect. I'm just saying there's a lot of room, there's a lot of space where it wouldn't make sense at all to do that. So I guess we've put it where we have foundation plantings along the rear of the building, the entire strip, except where there are doors. We don't have it in a narrow strip along the north because it's too narrow, but we could possibly put in some grasses that, if that's something we could, commit to. I don't know that they would grow in the north elevation.
I mean, the south is going to be hot. You're not showing any shade. There's no softening. It seems like there's a few things you could have put in the plan that would have made us feel better about the action that you're taking away without the buffer there.
Yeah,
so.
no, that's, I think your points are well taken, and the chairperson's comments are well taken as well. What I would offer to do is this: why don't, if you would entertain this, we could continue this with your permission and come back with a less nebulous proposal with regard, because I think what we're really doing is quite robust, and maybe we've not done ourselves a service by not having that more defined for you. So I'm happy to come back with that additional detail, see if we can get everybody a little more comfortable with what we're proposing.
Acceptable? Yeah?
Absolutely.
So we would continue? You ask for a continuance?
Yes, that's my request.
Okay. All good?
Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
We don't need to vote. Nope.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Price.
Thank you for the questions very much.
Yep, thank you.
just for the record, we do have agreement among the 4 board members here that the petition would be continued.
Yes. Do we need to vote?
I'd ask the man to your right.
I think it makes sense to have a vote to
Okay.
approve that, and just show
Yeah.
on the record that's continued to the
Okay.
next regular scheduled meeting.
Okay, do we have a motion to continue docket number 2024-19-DSV?
So moved.
A second. Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Thank you, Ms. Fedor. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, get myself here in my. All right. Our next item is docket number 2024-22-DSV. Lori Smitheram, is Lori with us this evening? Good, okay. First, staff report, please.
Yes, ma'am. I'm passing down some photos that was provided to me after I had already sent out the staff reports and all that good stuff. So take a look at the pictures. They're a really good representation of what we're going to be discussing. So yes, this is a development standard variance. As you will see, the patio is already there. So the request is to reduce the side yard accessory use setback requirement. The property is currently zoned RSF-2. Under the development standards, 5 feet is the requirement for side yard setbacks. And as you see in the photos, the project was built all the way to the property line. So the request needs to be reduce this side yard setback from 5 feet down to 0. And the confusion happened, just to show you kind of the history, a zoning code compliant site plan was originally submitted for this project. And a permit was issued, so it wasn't like they weren't having a permit. Just during construction and laying of the pavers in the patio, rather than stopping parallel to the wall, which is what the original site plan shown, they went all the way to the property line, and so our inspector went out to the property to close out the permit that was issued and realized rather than stopping where they had shown on their site plan, they'd gone all the way to the property line, which is how we've ended up here today. So, with that said, as far as staff positioning, again, to repeat what we have stated on previous petitions, we don't believe 1 and 2, we don't believe this project will be detrimental to the public health and safety. We don't believe the project negatively or adversely impacted property values on their adjoining neighbors. However, question 3, specific to hardship, circling back to what we've said, hardship cannot be self-created, and in this situation, we believe that this is a self-created hardship. It's not resulting from easements, encroachments, flooding issues, things of that nature. And because of the self-created elements of this hardship, of this condition, I should say, staff is not favorable of the request. I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions for Mr. Smith?
So the original, I'm looking at these pictures, the original end of the deck or the patio should have been where the gutter runs down along the.
Down the wall, if you look on the TV screen behind you, you'll see what was originally submitted. Let me zoom in here to where it's easier to see. But you see, I mean, it wasn't a straight line, but we understood what that meant, which was you see where it tied into the wall here, and it went back and then cut over, which showed the setback, right, or the 5 foot. But rather than stopping at the wall here where it tied in, it obviously went all the way over to the property line, which is where the problem is, right?
Further questions for staff? Okay, Mrs. Smitheram, if you want to come up to the podium, please, give your name and address and
My name is Lori Smitheram. I'm at 8759 West Cobblestone Drive in Zionsville. The intent for the patio was for an improvement to beautify my property, to have my adult children and my grandchildren come and spend time with me, and it'd be big enough for a bigger table for them to come, and also I have a fire pit. So I was the one that came in to get the permit. Not done this before. And my husband was usually the one to do it, but it's okay. He's not here. And I have to say, I obviously did not read the plot plan well. And anyway, I did not realize when it was drawn and colored in that I just assumed it's supposed to go to the end of my property. So that's it. I will say that my neighbors are agreeable to that. They're here to support me. There was no ill intent on my part. Anything else that I think I should add to that? Or any questions for me or my landscapers?
So, questions for Ms. Spillerum?
When you submitted the request to put this patio in, were there not dimensions given and association of termination of the patio with respect to the property line? I mean, I know the drawing there is kind of vague, although there certainly is ceasing at the edge of the home rather than property line. So
I guess there is there is a fence there. So in my mind, that's my property line. I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
That is your property line, but is that what you asked for? That's why I'm just trying to understand how
Sure.
it got from complete innocence in where the patio was to stop and then where it really stopped.
Right. So all I can say is yes, ignorance on that because I did not realize. In my head, it stopped at my fence.
Well, I think we're distinguishing between property line and setback line, and that's what is rearing its head here, because your property line is where where your fence is, but there is
Okay.
a setback line, which is 5 feet, in which you cannot build.
Right.
So that's meant to be a space between your property and theirs, because your neighbors probably have the same setback, so that houses had distance between them.
I say right because you're saying that, but
I understand.
right.
I
I did
understand.
not realize that.
But I would just suggest to you, and I
Yes.
don't mean this to be critical,
Nope.
but it is important to understand those things if you're going to undertake projects in your home, so that you know and you're informed about what is acceptable, and you're not, ending up having to ask for a variance for something.
Yes, it is a learning curve.
Yes, it is.
And it is a costly one, let's put it that way.
Well,
Yes.
I understand. I also understand that frequently people that come before us don't fully understand what the rules and restrictions are when it comes to zoning
Correct.
and the ordinances. I understand that.
Sure.
So this,
Go ahead.
The deck is 10 foot 6 in width on the southwest, or the patio portion of it's 10 foot 6 wide. 5 of it's over. Am I correct in that? Which means this would be a 5 foot 6 wide patio down through there. Is that correct? If it was if this was the code, it would only be 5 foot 6 in width, not 10 foot 6. Is that correct? Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm trying to just read this. What numbers are you looking at? You're talking about the deck or the patio?
The patio itself is 10 foot 6 in width, and it's 5 foot. I guess if this deck was, or this patio portion was built to code, it would only been 5'6" in width.
Yes.
Okay. That's a narrow patio.
And it is confusing because the plan doesn't look to scale at all, right? I think
Yeah.
that that's where some of the proportion is off so much that it looks like it should have been wider than it is long, right?
The lot looks like it's, at this, the
Yeah.
backside's 64 feet wide. Is that what I'm seeing here on this drawing? So if that's the case, there's 5-foot setbacks on either side, then there's,
Is the house 5 feet from the property line? Doesn't look like it. I'm eyeballing it, but
Yeah, no.
it's not either,
Yeah.
right?
This is actually less than 5 feet.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
yeah.
So it looks like the house is 64, or the lot is 64 feet and the house is 54 feet wide,
Yeah.
54 point,
Okay, so
5
like,
feet,
It's
5 on
5
each
feet on
side,
either
okay.
side.
yeah.
so the
So there would
fence
be
is probably
5 foot on
a
either
little bit
side.
in from the property line, and so that's tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Another question, did you do this yourself, or did you have a contractor do this?
Contractor.
And did the contractor ask you if, or look at the requirements to alert you to the fact that you were going outside the setback line?
Would you give your name and address, please? Yep. For the record.
Hello, my name is John Lasley. I'm the operations officer of John Lasley Outdoor Solutions. We're located on 911 Indianapolis Avenue in Lebanon. So just to kind of further explain the process of the permit submission and all of that. So we as a company, as we do have the customers go through the process of submitting the site plans and, going through the processes of that. And from the discussion that Lori had with the approval process of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the discussion was with the person that she submitted it to, it was kind of questioned right at the very end of, so does the patio go to the end of your property? And I think that was the understanding of Lori of, well, yes, it does go to the end of my property, but to the person that she submitted it to, they were thinking the end of the home. So the line that you actually see drawn there, that was drawn by you, or was that drawn by?
That was drawn by the person I was talking to
Yes.
in the office.
Yes. So what we had given as a design plan to Lori to submit is a file that is on here. I'm not sure what page it's on, but there is a file that we submitted for that. I saw as you were scrolling through it.
I will say some of our files we don't have access to because, long story short, our P drive went down this afternoon.
Okay.
So you said you saw it in here, though?
I'm pretty sure as you were scrolling through, it was on there.
Let me, I'll scroll through one more time for you. Zoom out so we can see everything. So it's not up there. So this is what we were just looking at.
Is it at the very end?
Let me go to the very end here,
Yep, right there.
right here.
So that was given at the time of submitting the information in order to receive the permit. So yes, it's very hard to tell, but you can see on the very far right side of that dark black line, yep, just right there. So this was submitted to them at the time. So for us as contractors, we were thinking, okay, everything's been submitted, everything's good to go. We haven't been told, nope, this is a no-go. So from the point of getting approval for everything that was submitted, we were not ever notified of the 5-foot setback. Which, understandably so, yes, that is the requirements, but unfortunately, we submitted everything for it. We got the green light, so we were green light to install. So that's where kind of I wanted to provide a clear understanding of where the confusion came from the submission of everything that went in regards for that. And just to make note of too, so the patio goes 4'5" off the house, and there's probably about 2 inches from the shared fence line to the end of the patio. So the fence line is actually less than 5 feet away from the home as well. And I do have a clear, I don't know if we can show this, or if I can pass this around. From the design, I zoomed out a little bit to kind of show a clear understanding of it. I don't know if you guys want to look at this as well to get a clear understanding. And also some pictures that we have of the site currently.
I think we've got that.
We have
Yes, that right
We
there.
have that one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where I was getting my numbers from earlier.
So on the plot plan, what is labeled deck is actually the sunroom, and the deck is just not drawn on the plot plan at all.
It is, it's in the bottom side of the plan. as you
Highlighted
see.
yellow plot plan. That was
Oh,
No, there is no, the deck is not on it. That's what the confusion is. It's labeled deck, but it's not. Maybe it used to be. I don't know. That's the enclosed sun porch now. And the one with the yellow highlighting.
Oh,
What
right
page
here.
is this?
Exhibit 3.
Exhibit 3. Yeah.
You're correct there, no.
Yeah. That's not a deck, that's the sun porch. Or that's the
Yeah, but I
enclosed
think
porch.
That's
Yep.
the deck there.
Right, but this drawn there, that's just this. There is no deck on the plot plan that was submitted. That's why she's confused. What's labeled?
You're right.
What's
Yeah.
labeled deck is the sun, it's not a deck, it's an enclosed room. And then there, no deck is shown at all on that, right, so.
I'm not sure what this is over here. Is that anything?
It's just the other side of the house, right?
So I guess our question is, what was submitted
Yeah,
as the final plan to the planning office that got the go-ahead? And was, what was given the go-ahead by the planning office incorrect? Or, I mean, what was the conversation?
So you're seeing kind of it play out in real time here, right?
Yeah.
Y'all's conversations about what are we looking at.
Right,
Hearing his story, I can put a pretty good fingerprint on, I think, what happened. We have a team we have team members that work at the front desk. They sit right in front of the door. They do a great job of helping people when they come in. That's what they do pretty much all the time. And it sounds like when the petitioner came in, one of our front desk employees helped her out by drawing this picture. And there was just a disconnect. And what happens once it's brought in from the counter is we process it. I'm not going to go into the weeds of that, but the paperwork is then passed on to our inspectors who do what we call plan review. And there was a disconnect somewhere between that handoff and clearly the plan reviewer looked at this and approved it because it visually it does look like it's not all the way to the property line. And so I could see why they would approve something like that. So I don't want to say they approved something they shouldn't have because visually it does look like that. Is there a measurement marked on that site plan that shows a 5-foot gap? No, the measurement's not there, but visually it looks like it stops at the corner of the home. So I could see where the confusion would come in. And then just hearing his explanation and seeing y'all's reactions, looking at the paperwork, it's easy to see where there would be a disconnect.
I can see how you thought that's what they approved, yeah. It's, I guess the
Yeah.
short story
but
is that it was
did
on.
did this plan
Yeah.
go to the planning office and get approval?
yes, but no. So that was provided for you guys today, but it's the same exact file of what we submitted. What you see in the other PDF that you were in first, which is the same exact file, same exact design, but what you have in your hands is a little bit more zoomed out. Yep, so scroll back down.
The one with the fire
Yeah,
pit and the
yeah.
little smaller tables when
Yes.
you
So
submit it.
that physical file was submitted at the time of getting the permit. So the plans hadn't changed, the design hadn't changed, but what's different in your hands is we zoomed it out a little bit and I added more details just for this evening so you can see where the shared fence line's at, where exactly her property line's at, and then also show you the measurement distance between the house and where the fence is at.
The one that's in grayscale here that we're looking at up here, that was submitted and you guys approved it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
You approved it.
There's also some other physical copies over here that was,
Okay.
and correct me if I'm wrong, Lori, but these were handed to
We looked
who you
at 'em.
submitted to, and
Yes.
they looked at that when you were going through the submission. Which these are more of like a point of view of the patio.
Well, I think a couple of questions come to mind. One would be, I don't know how having this be entirely patio affects drainage for neighbors, given that there's not,
Do we have any?
we haven't had any complaints with regard to drainage with the rain that we've had. With having the patio, there's been no complaints about drainage or anything, because you've patioed over what is supposed to be ground.
No,
So-
ma'am.
If I could speak to that too, so during the install, we also installed her downspout on that corner as well as the sump into a new pit and a new line to where any water that's gonna be coming out of that, it's not gonna go onto the surface of the patio and go into the neighbor's yard. It's actually installed into a dry pit on the property to where it's actually getting the water away from the neighbor's property. All of the materials for building it are all permeable, so the pavers themselves are permeable. We use 2 different rocks, both of those are permeable, 8s as well as 11s. So the materials we put are also made to kind of tackle any issues of water runoff.
Well,
Are patio stones considered permeable? I mean, they would, I understand that water's gonna go between the cracks, but
Well,
would that, are
there's-
patio pavers considered a
There
permeable?
are permeable, yeah, there are some, now, permeable is a relative term, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
It's- there's-
24 hours or 1 hour,
Oh,
yeah.
they're supposed to be,
How much rock is under them?
So it'd be different in each area, because each area we might have to dig out a little bit more depending on, you know, what base we were dealing with, but we based it at a minimum of 10 inches of stone under the rock.
That's a lot.
So, yeah.
So yes, they are for more than a day.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
think
lot.
for me, there is some
Yeah.
doubt what orientation they got from the plans in the planning office. Now, I don't know that I think that, I also think that it's incumbent on the property owner to clearly understand what the rules are with regard to any project that they're going to do on their property. And that's pretty, you know, that's the responsibility of the property owner. But I wonder if there was some confusion that wasn't corrected at some point in this process that then got passed along to the contractor who did the work.
Well,
I don't know.
If the planning office saw the 10-foot-6 and approved it, I can see how they thought they were getting approval for that. And so you wouldn't necessarily ask, is there a setback if they said it was okay? I think we own half of it at
Well.
least, so.
I don't know if this will make any difference or not, but with the submission, I did, my neighbors, Kent and Karen Abernathy, they're at 8751 West Cobblestone, which is on the west side of my house, and they wrote a letter that's in the submission packet that said they were fine with the location of the paver patio, which is located abutting the fence separating our 2 properties. So they were aware.
Yeah, this is one where, there are times when asking for forgiveness is more expedient than asking for permission. This is not one where I would encourage anybody to take that approach, but it does sound like there was confusion and no attempt here to
Respectfully, I wasn't aware until they came to do the final inspection.
Yeah, that doesn't seem that there was any attempt to deceive anyone. And evidently, there's not been any problem thus far. I don't know that this subdivision has any lot coverage restrictions.
There are lot coverage restrictions, but this is not a problem.
Okay.
And just to add on, until he had said what he had said, I knew there had been some confusion with the permitting. I didn't really know the story in depth, and the way it works is typically, if a permit can be issued, BZA is not involved, right? And so, to their defense, I had no idea this was even going on until, as she just mentioned, an inspector came out, and so it sounds like all of the paperwork went through the proper channels. Ultimately, for whatever reason, there was just some confusion or some disconnect between our inspectors and what was actually turned in, which led to approving. If what you turned in, and that's the other thing too, the BZA application is a little different, requires a little bit different type of paperwork than the actual IOP. I did not, I probably could have asked for this. I should have asked for the actual IOP, the building permit that you turn in. I did not ask for that. But anyway, there's a discrepancy in the paperwork that's actually used when you apply for an IOP versus what we get with a BZA application. That being said, if this was what was turned in and staff, our inspectors approved it, then there was a disconnect obviously there.
It looks like what the inspectors may have approved two different site plans.
Yeah.
If they were both submitted
And
at the same time.
unfortunately, I can't speak. I mean, I can't speak to why they did or how they did, because I didn't even get involved until after it was already on the ground and everything was done. So I'm not going to try to explain how that happened. But clearly there was a disconnect, and until he just mentioned his story here. So I'm saying I reserve the right to change staff's position based off new information submitted during the meeting. And I feel like that is an important point to make, that it was approved and it was permitted.
And the inspectors do the plan review, but I think that's probably shared among all the rest of the staff too. It's something we probably should all caught.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
The plans themselves were confusing because
Yeah.
the deck wasn't shown on
Right.
one plan and was measured from on the other, so
I'd like
a
to
very
mention,
honest mistake on the staff's part too. It was
Yeah.
very confusing.
I'd like to mention too, so you'd made the point, Mr. Dale, as far as approving two different site plans. I would say more than anything, where you saw like the line that was drawn, that site plan was made from the drawings that we had given them. So I think that's where the true disconnect happened, was they kind of had their own interpretation of looking at that and drew in the site plan themselves. And then that's where they made their ultimate decision to approve it. At that point, approve it. So,
okay, thank you.
in a way, yes, they approved two different site plans, but they also kind of made one of their own
Gotcha.
too. So
Thank you.
I just want to make sure I pointed that out.
Thank you.
So are we ready to take action here?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. I move that docket number 2024-22-DSV, Development Standard Variance to reduce the side yard accessory use setback requirement for the property at 8759 West Cobblestone Drive, be approved as presented and based upon the submitted findings of fact and the assumption that there has been a disconnect between staff and the petitioner, that the substantial compliance with the submitted plans which we received this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. That was a long and contorted.
It was, yes, I know.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Frieder.
Thank you.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Enjoy the patio.
Yeah, enjoy your patio.
It's beautiful patio.
It's nice.
Those are nice beds.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, are we good? Okay, Next item on our agenda is docket number 2024-25-DSV. This is Andy Cash. Is Mr. Cash here? Great, okay. I'll start with our staff report.
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Smith?
Let me zoom in on it here. You think after all the meetings I've attended, I would start bringing my glasses, but I never do. All right, so development standard variance, section 194-109. The request is to eliminate the west foundation plantings in the IORT zoning district. If you go to page 2 of your staff report, you'll see the specific development standard that they're requesting to deviate from. Page 3 is where staff produces our analysis, but very similar to the Harris petition. Our thinking is the same as far as number one, we don't believe this would be an injury to the public health safety of the community. 2, we don't think this will adversely impact the surrounding areas. However, question 3, as it relates to hardship, we believe with this being an undeveloped site, again, knowing the size of your property, knowing the rules that are currently in place, and with this just being a dirt, undeveloped field, we believe that the petitioner can and should have designed a project that fit within the size constraints and within the zoning requirements. Knowing the zoning ordinance and knowing the size of the property, the petitioner still designed a site that needed this variance. And so, because of the same thing we've said over and over, you can't create hardship, staff's position is unfavorable toward this request. Happy to answer any questions specific to it that you may have. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions for staff? No? Mr. Cash, if you would like to give your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Andy Cash. I'm at 212 Redwood Circle in Noblesville, and I did put together the site construction documents for the project. And yeah, thank you for that, Jonathan. I would like to say the owner is committing to relocating the required landscaping that's along that west facade, so we would just be substituting that in a more appropriate place, we feel. So the building is shifted to the west up against a drainage and utility easement, and this is the reason for the request, is that it's not appropriate to plant in that easement. And I would say that it is an existing lot, however, it's an established commercial park, and there is a access easement that is platted in this commercial park that's for this lot and the lot to the north. And did I include an aerial in my package, Jonathan? I don't remember, but
We do have
Ariel?
If you didn't include an aerial, I know I have.
all right.
There it is.
Right here.
So there, and that plot, there you go.
Sorry.
That's fine. This is the last lot to develop along the west side of Bennett, and there may be a few reasons for that, but there was a tendency here to align the Jacobs building for this project with that building to the north, given that access easement. So that did shift us to the west, up against that, that drainage and utility easement. And I would say that, and not that we've asked for credit for existing vegetation or trees, but there's a substantial tree line along that west property line. Ray Hall's kept their fence off of their east line about 6 feet. So even at 26 feet, if it was 20 feet for the easement, another 6 feet for the foundation planting, given the heights of those trees on the west side, I'm not sure it's the best location for the landscaping anyhow. So there's a corridor or an access between this project and the project to the south that leads to the Ray Hall property, and I think we can easily add to that landscaping through that area and enhance that corridor. I think it's a more appropriate place for the landscaping. And again, this isn't related to economics. The owner is committing to installing the full amount of landscaping required for the project, just in a different location here.
Mr. Cash, are there questions for the petitioner?
I think you, or the package also had some, and I don't remember the exact language, but it was essentially saying that the other businesses along there, the other ones that are already established, did not have foundation landscaping on the west side. Is that correct?
This is correct. It originally was not applicable, this ordinance language, obviously. The building to the furthest to the north and furthest to the south is immediately adjacent to that easement, correct? And starting from the east end of the Jacobs site, you know, we have some existing storm sewer that's cutting through that corner that's pushing us to the west, as well as another drainage easement. So starting from that drainage easement off the right-of-way, we have our landscaping to screen the parking lot. We've got the minimum modulus on the parking lot depth, and then a 6-foot foundation planting, and then this building. And that stacks up east to west pretty much the entire length of the property. So we're not completely up against that 20-foot easement to the west. I think we have about a 2-foot gap.
And the visibility from the west side, I mean, I don't know how dense that road, but that area there, which I think is trees in there now.
Quite a bit in
That's a
there.
good point, sir. It's, yeah,
And
it's
that,
obscured entirely. You would not see it from Bennett or even from the Great Hall Drive, and you wouldn't see it from the west.
You're trying to line up the front of the building with the neighboring building, right? It's pretty close.
To the south?
To the north. Is it about the same
Oh,
setback?
correct, yes.
Yeah, so they'll
Right.
form a line.
Given that
so-
access easement, that the tendency was to align those two buildings, correct?
Yeah, it would look like though.
There's the retention pond for Ray Hall is directly west. So between the tree line between you and Ray Hall, there's an open area, but there's also a retention pond there as well, correct?
The Bennett Parkway detention pond is to the north.
Mhm.
If you know, Ray Hall's development's not on this aerial,
Right.
if that's what you're seeing, I don't recall.
They've got a pond over there, it looks like.
Sure.
On a little bit more up-to-date map here.
Right. And anyone on the Ray Hall property looking to the east is going to see that tree line. It's very dense, the existing tree line. They're not going to see much of the Jacobs building or the foundation plans.
It would be pretty shaded there between the trees and the end of your building too.
That's a concern, yes.
You could get something, but it wouldn't grow big enough to be much of a screen anyway.
Whatever those counts would be along that west facade, I'm sure we can sprinkle those in along the south and to the east, but I think along the south is the better location.
Well, I'm not sure this really fits under the unnecessary hardship as a true hardship, but at the same time, looking at what's already happened there, it seems like it's imposing something that was not imposed on the others, and I'm not sure that it makes sense to impose it now.
Right.
It fits with the pattern of the building just to the north.
Particularly when you're talking about putting something into an easement, a sewer
Yeah.
line and so on. I mean, it's doing it just because it's required and not because it makes sense in some ways, I think. But
I don't see anything going in behind, to the west of this building, past that tree line either. It looks like it may eventually become parking for the Ray Hall project to begin with. So, not to mention those trees, it's been brought up already. You're gonna have a hard time getting anything to grow on the west side of the building with the tree line that close to it, so.
Agreed.
Is there any assurance that Ray Hall will preserve those trees, if that's important part of your
Yeah,
consideration?
that's a very good point, yeah.
Are all the trees on the Ray Hall property?
Doesn't look like it.
I think they go back and forth, east and west along that property line. In my mind, I think there's some assurance the trees will remain because Ray Hall set their fence back 6 or 8 feet. So there's,
Unless there's a need for that property, I would imagine it'll stay just the way it is.
I would think so, yeah. It's additional expense there.
Josh said it could become more parking perhaps if they need it, but
It's like it's cleared for parking, doesn't it?
if this is the only building that was required to have foundation planning on the west side, I'm not sure we're accomplishing anything.
Maybe foundations plannings at all when it was originally developed, but we've gone a long way to comply with the ordinance.
we ready to make a
One
motion?
quick comment, and I'm so sorry, I can't help myself.
No, do, please.
The tree lilacs, could you substitute them for something else that will end up on the invasive list eventually?
Oh,
It's not yet, but it should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point.
Might
Any
as well.
recommendation?
It's not labeled correctly anyway, so you may as well just
Oh,
give it a little.
see, another oversight.
Get you another nice understory that might hang in there a little bit better with some of the shady conditions anyway.
Which ones do you want to eliminate?
He can, I trust you, you'll get rid of those, you know. It's the Syringa reticulatus.
Indigenous plants.
What is it?
The ivory silk, it's supposed to be it's a tree lilac, but they're headed for the invasive list. They are some states, just not Indiana. So,
So we ready for a motion? Somebody?
Yeah, let me get to it here. I move that docket 2024-25-DSV Development Standards variance to eliminate the West Foundation planning requirements for property at 10890 Bennett Parkway be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report, staff recommendations, submitted findings of facts, and substantial compliance with submittal site plans.
Thank you, Ms. Fedora. Do we have a second?
second.
Thank you, Ms. Henshaw. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Your variance is granted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is docket number 2024-26-DSV. Carrie Bowman. Carrie Bowman? Development standards variance?
I think the petitioner's going to be online for this.
Oh, okay.
If that's correct. As far as the staff report, give me 1 second to pull it up.
Okay.
You may recognize this property. This got approval for office space back in 2023. It went from single-family residential to now the home office of an existing business. that use variance was approved with a sunset clause, a 3-year sunset clause, so the clock started ticking in 2023. They're now working on getting approval through Plan Commission. Part of that approval was addressing what you're going to see today, which is a reduction in the buffer yard along the south property line. To scroll down, you'll see the development standards, R1 up against the business, the PB zoning district is buffer yard D, which I've circled in red. You can see it on your screen there. The problem the petitioner is running into is the smallest number, which you'll see at the top, is 15 feet. The petitioner only has 10 feet 4 inches between the existing structure and the property line. So he was unable to comply with the minimum requirements of buffer yard D, which leads to the staff analysis. Rather than completely eliminating the buffer yard requirement, staff does recognize that you obviously only have 10 feet between the structure and the property line, but rather than eliminating completely the buffer, staff recommends conditional approval, and I've listed out under the staff analysis, it's page 3 of your report, the 3 different categories, A, B, and C, that we could have selected from where he has the distance to be able to meet that buffer yard. And if you look on the screen, the one that we elected to go with, C1, is the closest buffer that you could get to buffer yard D. C1 requires 10 feet, which is the petitioner is able to adhere to. So based off those statements, staff is recommending conditional approval of this request, with the condition being that rather than adhering to buffer yard D, the petitioner needs to adhere to buffer yard C. Happy to answer any of your specific questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So that would mean that with C1 that they would be obligated to put in 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs?
Yeah, and so you'll see, obviously, for example, if you look at the chart A4 is 12.5 feet. He doesn't have that. So there are some in here that we're not going to be able to obviously use. C1 is what we went with, but you could reference B1 or A1, 2, or 3.
Okay, and that is mandatory. He would have to put in mandatory plantings according to which of those categories he was.
Yeah,
Yep.
or if we reduce it down to 0, you don't have any buffering.
Right.
Staff does not support reducing it to 0. We would like to see some buffer there somewhere. We went with C1 just because that's the closest thing to
Right.
what is required by code, which is D. But you could technically go with A1, 2, 3, or B1.
Okay, any questions for staff?
Is this, did you say this is going to the Plan Commission or has been?
So this is, so it has. It's got conditional approval with certain things that need to be worked through. This is one of those things that needs to be worked through. And so that's why we're here. And the actual use variance was approved through the BZA in 2023. So the clock on the 3-year sunset clause actually started then. And so the clock is ticking on that. So.
So do we have the petitioner with us online?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Oh my gosh, you can see me too. My name is Kerry Bowman, and I own the property at 5898 South, 700 East, Whitestown. I live at 35440 Autumn Glen Circle in Winchester, California. So appreciate you entertaining this. We got the use variance a year ago and, tried to get down this path. And then there was the concern about the south buffer yard doesn't really accommodate what's needed. I've owned these properties, well, this property and the adjacent half-acre property for 25 years, and sort of been there, grandfathered into a lot of things. But the Boys and Girls Club next to us actually really has a nice buffer yard about 60 feet from this building, and several, 5 or 6 good-sized trees, that kind of thing on a mound. And I've actually mowed the area between this building and that buffer line. But we have concerns with not just the C1 designation, but I would with anything to some degree along there. I have concerns about planting trees in a 10-foot span up against a foundation that's on a cinder block. And then we have made the move, not just to move this to office buildings, but for a number of years, I've always known that the 5 pull-off parking spaces right off of 700 East going down to the Z West School and the soccer club is a very unhealthy, dangerous kind of thing. So trying to move those parking spaces to the back side of this facility is some of the goal as well, and incurring the cost to do that. It had been my desire, and still is at some level, to have a second lane that would go along the side of that house to go and access those parking spaces in the rear of the house. However, the driveway between this house and the adjacent house next to it, which I own, can be a common shared driveway, and that's what we're looking at doing. At the moment, I need to talk to the Boys and maybe getting an easement or something. So, yeah.
We're having some trouble.
Have currently designed the parking spaces with the required number of parking spaces to sort of eat into that 10-foot easement some too. So my preference is to be able to eliminate the requirement for landscaping in that 10-foot strip that runs along the south side of this half-acre property, and hopefully in the future maybe get a second lane that would go out back through there. And so that's where we're at, just trying to get this to the Plan Commission so they can approve it and keep moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bowman. Are there any questions for Mr. Bowman?
Would you be amenable to doing some landscaping without trees so that there at least is landscaping there? And if you wish to pursue at some point putting a drive through there, at least you're not cutting down large trees or something that might be less than advantageous to the basement or whatever the foundation is.
Sure, that would be better. I would know that that wouldn't mess up my foundation, and those kinds of things aren't as expensive or as hard to maybe pull in the future, but we could put some shrubbery along the south side of the house.
How much of some would be adequate? Or
Well, the
sufficient?
house is 30 feet wide.
So there's no ambiguity when we're doing plan review, if this is a direction you want to go in.
You're the landscape.
10 shrubs. Right.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if you planted them 3 or 4 feet apart.
Our desire is to replace the siding on this building. We got the roof finally replaced to match the roof on the house next to it, but there's some continued work to get this thing up to code from curbside look.
Assuming they're smaller shrubs, tend to make a little line.
Is there a standard in our code that we could reference, or?
Where's your?
A, B, and C would be your lightest requirements for landscaping, all of which, not all of them require canopy trees, but all of which require at least an understory tree. And I will say too, I didn't put this in the staff, I put it in the staff report, I didn't mention it. The use variance that was approved by you in 2023 was contingent on their ability to get approval of the development plan through Plan Commission. Approval of that is contingent on your decision today.
Right.
So, and their inability to get the development plan will result in their inability to actually
So that's the,
get the use variance.
My feelings would be that some adequate amount of smaller landscaping materials in there would be better than leaving it as is, but avoid the risk of putting a large canopy tree or trees in there. Even if it were an understory tree, that's less risk, I suppose. But I don't know that that's necessarily important, but just some form of landscaping.
I suppose it could be something like a mixture of shrubs and grasses, for example. Something that would at least demarcate the line, but without doing damage to your foundation or, you know, things that could be expendable if need be because of your discussion about the driveway. So
Maybe 50% evergreen shrubs?
50%
Evergreen shrubs?
evergreen shrubs or
And then
It's gonna be so few, it's just gonna look like a little.
yeah, little,
a little-
Okay.
It is nicely maintained as lawn, honestly, right
Right.
now. and
Boys
it's nice
Girls
that
Club
way.
lines show good delineation, but, you know, if you feel that some shrubs need to be there, we can work with that.
Give us some
What
recommendations,
are
Jocelyn.
those? You have little, I mean, they look like utility boxes right on the line. What is that? What are those?
Probably utility box of some sort.
Not sure you want to plant that close to them either.
Oh, they plant right around those things.
Yeah, those are those little electric things and everything.
so just a question, Mr. Smith, he's asking to have the buffer line set to 0,
Okay.
correct?
Yes.
Which would mean there's nothing mandated as far as plantings are concerned. So if we would say that we would like to have some plantings put in, the buffer would still be 0, or it would be 10 feet 4 inches, which is what he has there now? I guess I'm trying to understand.
If you look on the, I got the page on the staff report pulled up.
Yes,
Depending, so the buffer yard width is one factor, and then the number of plants within that width is the second factor.
okay.
Obviously, if you reduce it down to 0, the buffer yard to 0, there's no place left to put plants.
So we would decrease it to what he has, which is 10
Yeah,
feet
yeah.
4 inches, and then separately ask that he would put in that buffer.
Yeah,
Zone,
so like
some plantings.
if you look at the chart here, you could, in theory, if you went with A1, you could reduce it even farther than what he has. You could reduce it down to 5 feet. He has 10 feet 4 inches. You could reduce it down to 5 feet if you went down with A1. A1 would require 1 canopy tree and 1 understory tree. Based off what I'm hearing from y'all's conversation, though, it doesn't sound like you want to require trees. You might. So it sounds like you're
But that's
Sound-
per 100 feet, right?
Yes, 100
Yes, yeah,
feet.
yeah. So,
And you have 30 feet.
So I have 275 feet, except the setback from the center of the road, 70 feet, I guess. I don't know how that's calculated, so they're still seen as trees there, I guess.
I would ask for staff's clarification, because they're going to have to go through and do plan review on this after the fact, that you clarify both how wide you want the buffer yard and the types of landscaping that you would like to see in there and the numbers that you would like to see.
So you're planning on moving the, I mean, I'm worried about the back out parking onto that busy road too. You're planning.
Yeah, it's bad.
Honestly, I don't want to do something that's
Yeah.
gonna prohibit you from getting rid of that. That is the safety concern first. Certainly a shared driveway, but then you need to be able to circulate.
Well,
and turn
my
around.
renters in the big house, which looked like the little house where we did the extreme home makeover 20 years ago, they're concerned about the common shared drive.
Yeah.
So, but I just knew I need to keep moving forward with this. And if I can get the parking spaces to the back and pull them up off the road, that would be one step. And then come back and try to get the drive on the south side of the house for the other property.
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing at a time, whenever it's needed.
Well, could we grant the buffer, the existing yard, as, just call that the buffer yard, and not mandate plantings, given that his intention is to put a driveway there? Because it's not as if he's got immediate neighbors. I mean, he's backing onto the
Yeah.
parking lot of the Boys and Girls Club.
Right.
And there are some trees there, according to some sizable trees there
Yeah.
already. But I guess asking him to put 10 plants or something, it's, as I think to your point.
I
is
think he's gonna have to
that's
tear them out
Yeah.
anyway once he puts the driveway
They're
in.
gonna look like little,
Well, I will say too, and this is kind of diving off into something that we don't really have jurisdiction over, but there will be challenges in getting approval for the second drive.
right?
There is just not enough area, and the radius, when it connects to the existing road, it's going to, if he builds it according to what's required, to get just blanket approval for the second drive, he would have to put part of that, I believe, onto area owned by the Boys and Girls Club, just because of the radius. So it is an option that he can attempt to get, but to try to sell it as that's what's going to happen, it's not guaranteed approval that second drive is going there.
Okay. Okay, well,
In fact, I would say it's going to be a very similar process through that governing body of variance, and the standards are pretty high. I just don't want to sell the idea that you're guaranteed to have a second drive there.
Right.
And
But we
because of
shouldn't be
that,
assuming that there's gonna be a driveway
Right.
coming in, is what
Right.
you're saying.
you should not be assuming that driveway is going
Okay.
there.
And honestly, I'm not totally sold on not putting trees in there either. I mean, I understand your foundation concerns, but
You can
that
put
by the
them
time
in,
that tree gets to that size, it's gonna be a long way down the road.
as long as,
Yeah, I've been there for 25 years, so I've seen the other trees grow that big as well as the ones between the big house and the soccer field. So I'm pretty mindful of that stuff. I've already had issues with the trees messing up my septic tank on the north side of the second parcel. But yeah, I mean,
That's a different story.
whatever favor you grant is good. I know I got to get these parking spaces to the back, and being able to get the right size of spaces to go to code is important to me too. And just being able to have a clear 10-foot grassway path all the way along the south side of my property is what's preferred, but I'm at whatever favor you have.
could he have the flexibility to put a lot of that landscaping towards the back though, rather than sandwiched between the property line and the house? Could we give him that flexibility so that you get the trees, a couple trees in there?
Yeah,
And that buffer, but,
I trust y'all's
allowing-
judgment. Y'all, this is not your first
yeah.
decision to have to make. I trust your judgment. The only thing that I would like to stress is just clarity, because there will be staff at the end of this that has to look.
Right,
And
right.
if you're wanting to get so specific that you want it all to go to the back of a certain section or something to that effect, make sure when you make your motion that it's clear, so we understand what you're actually intending to approve.
It is gonna be hard to put that driveway in there, but given the safety issues, it's worth a shot, right? And I don't wanna make it harder for
Yeah,
him.
he absolutely has every
Yeah.
right to request to put the driveway there. I just want to make it
Yeah.
clear that we all understand that it's not a guaranteed approval, and there will be.
I have to,
Go ahead.
I have begun conversations with the highway department, so I'm aware of what their concerns are and the process I have to go through, and that's why some of the conversations need to happen with Boys and Girls Club, but it would be my preference to get it put in as a possibility, but I do know I have some hoops to jump through for that.
So I guess I'm sort of, for myself, leaning toward creating that buffer with what he has existing. The question is the 10 feet, 4 inches, if that's right. The question is what has to go in there that will satisfy the buffer requirements, and whether that's understory trees and bushes or other plantings, grasses, whatever. I don't feel that I'm adequately prepared to make a list of what needs to go in that landscaping, aside from just a general sense of numbers based on what our rubric is. So others have ideas?
A1 would give him 5 feet, 1 canopy tree and 1 understory tree per 100 linear feet. Seems like those could, as long as we gave him the flexibility to push those to the back, that wouldn't be too crowded. The trees look nice in the big field. A few little randomly spaced little bald, shrubs doesn't really do anything at that scale. Right, so I mean, we could force him into 10 feet, but it's still only three shrubs per 100 feet of this length. It would be, it's just lost out in the field. So I would lean towards A1. Put them right along the edge. It's a few trees.
So that the buffer yard would be 5 feet.
It's a 5-foot buffer yard. With
Okay.
1 canopy tree and 1 understory per 100 feet, so.
Well, according to this diagram here, it looks like A3 might be better even, because then it's just saying 1 understory tree.
Understory
Right.
tree.
Per 100 feet. And that's a 10-foot
But
yard.
that's a 10-foot yard.
And closer to what you have.
So it'd be a 3 understory. I didn't even measure, I'm just
Right.
guessing it's about 300
You
feet.
said you said you have 240 linear feet, is that right?
40.
270 linear feet, but
170.
setback is 70 feet, so I don't know if you can put a tree in that first 70
No,
feet.
yeah,
I
okay,
think they make you round up
right.
usually, instead of a quarter of a tree, so.
So this is A3. Is that amenable to folks?
A3?
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I am too.
Something.
Okay, so do we have a motion to be made?
What was that? A1?
A3.
A3?
Yeah.
I move that docket 2024-26-DSV Development Standard Variance to reduce the required buffer yard along the south property line for the property at 5898 South 700 East be conditionally approved as presented and described based on the findings of the staff report and the staff recommendations and submitted findings of facts, and that it include the A3 landscaping requirement in the buffer side yard, be in substantial compliance with the submitted site plans, and a condition requiring a petitioner to adhere to buffer yard A3.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedora. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Bowman. I think you have A3.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
the
you.
consideration. All right, bye.
Thank you.
Make them
Bye-bye.
good.
iPad 6. It
Okay.
died on, I fell asleep.
There you go.
Thank you.
Right.
All right.
All right. Remaining item on our agenda is docket number 2024-28, DSV, the Wedgewood Building Company. And I assume that's the gentleman in the back, still with us. Thank you. All right. Mr. Smith, if you would like to give us a staff report, please.
Yes, ma'am. So this is a property in the Promontory PUD. The project is the construction of a tennis court. The problem we're running into is the tennis court encroaches significantly into the 150-foot rear yard setback requirement. You can see in this PUD, the development standards are listed out in Exhibit 3, which I have snipped out a little piece of it for you to look at in the staff report. That's what they're coming to the BZA to request, is the encroachment into that 150-foot rear setback. We did receive approval from the PUD. They looked at this, they received approval. And as far as the staff positioning, this is going to be a little unique in that, again, we're recommending conditional approval. Historically speaking, we have not required what we call ILPs, improvement location permits, for tennis courts. But for this case, we want to be able to ensure that the applicant adheres to the site plan that he's submitting. And I believe, if I'm correct, I got an updated site plan today. Unfortunately, we had some IT issues, and I wasn't able to bring that here. I think it's in my email. But we want to ensure that the petitioner adheres to this updated site plan. And the way that we can do that is by requiring the petitioner to apply for a building permit, what we call our improvement location permits. So with that being stated, staff positioning is supportive of this request. Question 1, we do not believe the request will injure or be dangerous to public health safety of the community. Thank you. Additionally, we don't think this is going to adversely impact property values or the adjoining properties. And the final condition, which is hardship, we believe the 150-foot rear setback requirement in this PUD is unique. Most setbacks are not that extreme. Even if this is approved to encroach into the setback, there will still be 81 feet between the tennis court and the property line, which is still greater than most residential rear setbacks, even with this encroachment. So we believe that is a unique condition to this site, creating hardship in this request. And staff recommends conditional approval, again, with the condition being the applicant needs to apply for a ILP permit and receive approval of that permit as part of the conditional request. And I believe I've shared this with the petitioner. I'll let them speak to it, but I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there questions for Mr. Smith, staff? We good? Petitioner, you are Mr. Lewis? Lawrence. Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Please give your name and address for the record.
Sure. Rick Lawrence. I'm an attorney with Nelson and Frankenberger. Our address is 550 Congressional Boulevard, Suite 110 in Carmel, Indiana, 46032. With me tonight is Paul Owen from Wedgewood Building Company. Just have a short little presentation. I hope it gives some light on this and what we're requesting and kind of the overview of the location. This is the subject site. As Jonathan noted, it's in the Promontory PUD area being developed near 200 North and 1000 East up there in bold red there on, well, I guess behind you. I'm not sure what's in front of you there. This is the subject lot that we're talking about. It's a residence for the Kissels, which is also going to be in the 2024 Homerama, which is in this area. This is in the circle oval, yellow circle oval, the site and the concept plan that was submitted with the PUD. I wanted to show you this for two purposes. One, the general area, And then two, to show you its location in response to the lake directly to the north. And then there's a larger lake you can see there that already exists directly to the south across the Windy Hills Road. This is an elevation of what the residence will look like from the front, just for reference purposes. Here on the screen is what I passed out to you. We just provided this to Jonathan's office this afternoon. He had asked for a dimension site plan so that we could show the area and where this tennis court was located in conjunction with the house, the pool, and the lot lines, including the setback line, which is the dotted line pretty much in the middle of that site plan. And then further north of that, at the tip of the corner, the northeast corner of the tennis court, that is a drainage easement that's maintained by the county. That'll come up here in a second. This is the landscape plan, which shows the tennis court as landscaped. There's significant landscaping to the west, which is the adjoining property line right there. And then to the east, you see where there's existing landscaping for the house that's being built down there to the kind of bottom half of the landscape plan. A close-up of the landscape plan shows we are encroaching 68 feet into that rear setback. It's butting up against the drainage easement there. We're not crossing over the easement. Prior submissions of these documents did have some landscaping in that easement. Jonathan indicated that the county was going to be reluctant to approve that, so we adjusted the site plan and location of the tennis courts to pull everything out of that easement, so we're not going to have to address that, which was a note that was in the staff report. So that is no longer a concern with what we're asking for. So Jonathan had noted that the petitioner seeks approval of the petition, and we are fully understanding and would agree to the condition that we apply for and receive the improvement location permit so that the staff can monitor the construction of the tennis court. What is unique about this request is the 150-foot setback comes from the PUD. It doesn't come from the town's ordinance, but rather the PUD. And it's not clear in the PUD, but we believe it was more conditioned for that larger lake to the south that's now on the screen, so that people's views weren't obstructed from that lake. So that's where the overall 150-foot came from. There are also provisions in the PUD that talk about exceptions for what's called lakeside living areas, and those aren't defined in the PUD. The PUD does say that the BZA has authority to determine what could be considered anything that's not defined, which this term is not defined in the PUD. So overall, we're asking for approval from the BZA to allow that tennis court to be constructed into that rear yard setback, which currently isn't allowed under the PUD, but with the condition that we apply for the improvement location permit and then comply with building it for those site plans, excuse me, submitted with that permit process.
Good.
We're here to answer any questions you might have and ask for
Good.
your approval this evening.
Thank you. Are there questions for the petitioner?
We do appreciate staff's working with us to kind of clarify some things and understand the unique nature of this request.
Could you go back to the slide that showed the 68-foot, I think it was a setback with the arrow? Yeah, there you go, thank you.
And the other unique aspect of this is if this was a grass tennis court, we wouldn't be here this evening. It's because of the playing surface that they've chosen, which is asphalt, that gives rise to this also.
And so the area surrounding the court is asphalt. What is the area surrounding it going to be comprised?
There's a little strip that's 2 feet wide of gravel,
Mhm.
and then that's where the fence would be on the immediately outside of that. And then you have the significant landscaping that's shown here on both sides of the tennis court. It's more pronounced on the west side so that it's buffering that neighbor also. And then to avoid on the north side of the tennis court, that easement, we pulled all the landscape off of that so that we wouldn't run into that issue. And there's really nothing behind there but that lake.
Questions? Concerns? We're ready to.
You want a motion?
If we're ready.
I'll
Go ahead, if you're ready, go right ahead, I'm still looking for
I
it.
move that docket 2024-28-GSV Development Standard Variance to provide for the construction of a tennis court within the rear yard setback for property at 9730 Windy Hills Drive be conditionally approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and the staff recommendations, submitted findings of fact, substantial compliance with the submitted site plans, and a condition of approval requiring the petitioner to apply for and receive approval of an improvement location permit.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fedor. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You grants your,
Thank you for your time tonight.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Likewise.
Last one of this.
Okay, so we still do have a couple of things on our agenda.
Yes.
Before we adjourn.
Thank you.
We need to, given that Chris, we no longer have a vice president, the question that I would ask, does it make sense to wait until we have our new person seated, which we're hopeful in August would be the case, before we elect the vice president, or shall we go ahead? I'm open to discussion and thought.
You're gonna be here in August, right?
That's my plan.
Well, then I think we're okay.
We seem to get by.
We'll go about month by month here, how's that sound?
There's another alternative.
Yes?
We could have a conditional, as we did in the first election of this year, knowing that there was a change coming.
Yeah, well, we could do
In
that.
case you're not here next time, so we don't have to settle it at that time.
Well,
I mean,
whatever you think
I
is
don't
the most-
care, but it's unlikely, but at the same time, we could do that and say we would have a permanent nomination and election of a vice president once the new member joins.
Okay, well, that would be also fine with me, if that makes sense, and that's fine. Or it may well be that we just elect a new vice president and that person is in the job. So, I don't know, if somebody newly seated on the board would want to be the vice president. I don't know. Open to wisdom and thoughts.
Probably none of us have asked anyone else, but I would offer to nominate Josh Fedor to serve in the conditional vice president role if he's willing.
I would be fine to do it conditionally, yes. Conditionally, yes. Start with here.
Is there a second?
Second.
Shall we talk about him while he's still sitting here, or should we just vote? All in favor of Josh Fedor taking the role of vice president conditionally, possibly permanently, signify by saying aye.
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 Oh, good. All right,
I
thank you
guess
very
I
much.
must
That
have
was
myself right.
well taken care of, and I do plan to be here in August, but now that you mention it, I think I may be glad.
There are no guarantees.
No, there
You're
are.
exactly right.
We've learned that. The other item on the agenda is a discussion about the proposed ordinance change that I know has been discussed by the Plan Commission, and changing from the hardship to the practical difficulty metric. And I thought it would be important for us to have a discussion about this. We will be the people seeing this with petitioners. So I want to be sure that we understand clearly what it means and how we would apply it. There are definitions included with this, defining practical difficulty and also unnecessary hardship they would be included with the ordinance to help people understand what that might look like. I don't know if you had a chance to look at these definitions and whether you have thoughts about, this will go from, the Plan Commission has approved it, so the next stop is going to be the Town Council. But I think if we have ideas or input to be made, then it's upon us to make any input if we have doubts or concerns or would like to do any tweaking, let's say. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Number 3 is particularly vague. I mean, the other two are. This is by necessity, I guess. The strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. Not use according to accepted or common use or use. Like, can you walk across it? I mean, it just seems so vague.
Well, if you look at the definitions.
Is there, am I interpreting it?
That sentence is exactly what the statute says.
I know, but it's just very.
Well, if you look at the definitions that are on page, in section 3, practical difficulty is, according to this definition, means that significant economic injury will result from the strict application of the zoning ordinance, subdivision control ordinance, or other land use ordinances. And, I don't know, in the past, we've not had economic hardship be the metric for, so I don't know adding the word economic.
It's not just hardship.
There's really three.
Injury is different.
There's really 3 criteria in there. Economic injury is one. The second, the injury cannot be self-created. And then thirdly, there cannot be feasible alternatives. So in the board, weighing whether the variance meets the threshold, there's really 3 kind of criteria within that paragraph as a guide to the board.
I think another way, a helpful way to think of the rule is that if the injury isn't self-created, or if the request for the variance isn't self-created and leads to the variance, and if there aren't feasible alternatives, then you get to the injury. And if a petitioner is here and there's no, if they're asking for a setback difference, and and there's no difference in cost between what they're going to build, to a certain point to the setback or to a different point, then that's all of it is discretionary for you to decide whether they've proven there's an injury. Just to nerd out for a minute, there's a man named Brian Garner who is a law professor, and he's the leader of the plain language movement, and he's a snoot. He's a syntax nerd of our time, and he's the editor of the Black's Law Dictionary.
You said a whole bunch of stuff there that means nothing to me, but keep going. I'm fine.
He has one of his books is a modern English usage book, and he points out that the word economic is misused for financial all the time. But I think that's what the significant economic injury comes from a 1985 case where the court points out that there aren't very many courts interpreting what practical difficulties meant. So then this court kind of established basically the parameters of what the rule that Dan Taylor drafted for the new, for the proposed zoning ordinance change. And unfortunately, you take what they say and then the facts of the case. What they were really looking at was there evidence that it was going to affect, there's cost involved in this case. This was McDonald's wanted a sign variance. They wanted a taller sign than was permitted. So in the facts in that case, it really wasn't a cost issue to them. It came down to whether a taller sign was going to make them more profitable. And but that's our job as lawyers. We have to take what courts say and how they define things, and then give our best advice based upon, because if you go to this right now, if one of your cases were appealed now with the unnecessary hardship, a court of appeals would have a difficult time, because I hope that the first thing they would note is all of the cases on unnecessary hardship are use cases, not development standard variances they're called area variances, not use variances. So a court's going to say, if in Indiana a court of appeals is going to evaluate Zionsville's ordinance, they're just going to have to, it'll be prima facie trying to apply something that's always been discussed in context of factual background of use and not a development standard.
I think one of the things that I think will be true with this change, if you think about what percent of our petitions that have to do with the village, I mean, a lot of, particularly with use variances, they want more lot coverage, or they want the pool, various things. And how do we, if someone comes to us and says, I want to add a detached garage, my cars are having to sit outside, blah, blah, blah. And the argument is, this will add to the value of my house. This will make my house worth more. Then if we say you can't do that, is that an economic practical difficulty that we're imposing in not allowing them to do something that will be, and this is the question I have, how do we distinguish something, it may be self-created, however, most things that people want to do with their houses are ideas that are self-created.
Right.
I don't know how you distinguish.
And this definition is the injury cannot be self-created.
Yeah.
And you guys decide whether it's self-created.
Yeah, well.
Then you don't have to get to the economic injury.
If you think about the people that were here this evening that wanted the garage because they have cars that they can't get in their garage, and that's a need. So I guess I'm just trying to fully understand.
That was the site issue. They put those lots way too close to be able to put cars in and out and back them in and out.
Right.
They really did. That was the developers. I felt bad for them. That was a site issue.
Yeah.
That really is. A turning radius from a big car doesn't back that way.
Yeah,
If there's
like
somebody
a
else
truck.
there, it
They
just
had
doesn't.
A truck and an SUV they were trying to
You
do.
would barely make it and you wouldn't see where you were backing. So that was a poor development. That was my pet peeve. That wasn't their fault. But
What I want to be sure is that if we're going to attach the word economic to practical difficulty, that doesn't preclude other practical difficulties that may not be economic. For example, the topography of the lot is such that I have to build it in this spot and violate the setback because I can't build it any other spot on the lot, or the drainage is such that it has to be here.
just because it's cheaper to do it that way.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
You as a board are the deciders. If it costs $100 more if the ordinance is enforced, may be significant in one case. If it's $100,000 more in another case, it may not be significant. That's just, I know that's not, it's easier to have a more black and white rule, but this is, at this point interestingly, the statutory process for amending a zoning ordinance that the BZA has to enforce, it doesn't contemplate the BZA having a say in that ordinance.
That's called governmental wisdom.
Yeah.
That's what
The
that's
wisdom
called.
of our legislature.
It
But
doesn't
so
seem
if-
easier to explain, because we are explaining hardship to people. This one doesn't seem easier for us to explain
No, I
to
think it's
people,
not.
or for your staff to explain up front to them in the process, like, this is what you're gonna have to show. They're gonna read this and go, significant to me, you know?
Yeah. I'll make
check,
it
you know?
even more
So-
confusing. The cases say, well, unnecessary hardship is pretty well established, and it's not. Practical difficulties is just a matter of degree. It's just a lower
Right.
burden than unnecessary hardship. That's what the wisdom of our appellate judges.
Yeah, it lowers the bar, and that also brings issues with, and I guess I feel this mostly because of the village and the types of things that come to us that, people want to do in the village, and how will this impact decision-making, and so, there's been some pushback on some of the decisions, obviously, as we have witnessed, so.
Just an example, in that 1985 McDonald's case, the court, that was I think it was Marion County Board of Zoning Appeals. The trial court overturned the BZA decision, and then the Court of Appeals said, no, the BZA was right, based on the evidence. And on the economic injury there, the court said that even though McDonald's argued that it had proven that without the taller sign, that their sales were going to be affected by 15 to 20%, the court said, well, obviously the BZA, there wasn't evidence that they weren't, they nevertheless weren't going to be profitable. And so just on those facts, the Court of Appeals overturned the trial courts and reinstated the BZA decision.
So making less money does not necessarily constitute an economic injury.
Right.
Right, because you still have a business, you still have a house,
Yeah.
just 'cause
I'm
it's not-
concerned about the fact that we're specifically giving, significant economic injury could mean something different to everyone here. So we haven't cleared up anything in doing that, in my estimation. And if you tie it all to economic injury, I think if there is, I think, no, you really do lower the bar. And there could become a common theme that projected economic impact becomes prevalent, because almost everything people bring in here probably improves the value. So if we deny it, we've denied them the opportunity to improve an economic gain in most cases. And I wouldn't want, I guess a couple things. One, I like this, that all facts taken together indicate that the property cannot, and then you can include in there that economic maybe, but I think we open the door for the possibility of seeing an economic injury with each one of them that comes in. I think we run that risk. Practically that won't happen, but it will, because we got some attorneys that come in here and represent petitioners, and yeah, I could write their script for them. It's the same thing every time, and we'll start seeing that. So I guess pinning it all on significant economic injury, to me, seems like we've really lowered the bar. We might be creating a bigger problem in the future, and I would like to think that the composition of this board could sort through all the factors. It's just not that one that might be the reason that you say no.
And I think, again, for me, adding the word economic, for me, in reading that, implies that that is the main criteria, and not other difficulties that could arise from the application of the ordinance. And I guess that's where I struggle.
I think there's a lot of room. Discretion is powerful. The board's vote is discretionary. So you have discretion on, like judges, you're deciding what the law is, and you're deciding what significant economic injury is. But there's a lot of room in it cannot be self-created, and there cannot be feasible alternatives.
But I also have heard you say that it is very important as we make these decisions that we explain the rationale behind our decision-making as we go along. And that rationale could be, when you're talking about, evaluating whether somebody's difficulty is sufficiently economically damaging, or whether it even is economically damaging, is a pretty subjective, unless they're going to come in with, 3 realtors and so on, demonstrating that not being able to have this pool in their backyard is going to, make a major impact on their resale value or something. So I agree with Steve that I think we're going to start seeing a script that's going to be.
My future value is being impacted by
Right.
not being allowed to do this.
Right.
And then that's up to you to decide whether that's an actual economic injury
Right.
or not.
Well, significant, it's got to be significant
That's
injury.
Yeah.
Now,
It is conjecture, though. You don't know what
No,
property values will do in the future. You don't know if the future buyer wants a pool. We didn't.
Right.
Specifically wouldn't buy one. I don't want to take the risk with my kids.
That's a common
So-
objection. That's
so-
it's
But
you
It's speculative.
See, giving as the deciders, you're giving weight to the evidence. So if it's speculation, doesn't carry much weight. So that's you can. If you're in a position to explain something, you can say that's completely even if they bring in an economist and a mathematician and they put on all the evidence,
And
you
said
can still
Pope and a
decide.
rabbi the last time you made that argument.
Two minister, 2 priests, 3 rabbis, an economist.
and an Indian
I'm
chief.
gonna put the farm hat on here on this economic, because as we've been talking, significant economic injury will result from strict application of the zoning ordinance can really get sticky with some of these alternative power uses that farmers are being approached with all the time. Somebody could come in and say, you are significantly causing me economic distress because what some of these solar and wind projects are offering to landowners is massively higher than what they're currently getting. 3 to 4 times what some of them are already getting. So I guess the argument can be said that that you're going to cause significant economic injury.
I think it's
to
what.
me in that situation. Much like, an improvement on a home, you're going to affect my home values, you're going to affect my farm's value down the road because I don't have these improvements on it already.
It's like Mr. Dale just said, the likely, it's like any trial judge. Trial judge makes his or her decision, and then everybody has a right to appeal to a court of appeal and make their best arguments. For you guys, it's not as much, I don't think that the rationale, unless you are talking about things that just, I'm trying to think of an example quickly, that unless you're talking about something that just isn't rationally related to the facts, as long as you're making, and what you guys really do well is discussing and then discussing the findings that you are basing the decision on. As long as that's in the record, the court isn't going to, just like in this McDonald's case, they said, well, the board, they said they were going to make 15 to 20% less without the taller sign, and the court said, they had evidently discussed on the record that that wasn't sufficient, and that was upheld. So it's you don't have to make decisions, and I know you're not saying this, but the way I am, this is why I don't want to be a judge. You're not making decisions to a degree of metaphysical certainty. It's you're calling balls and strikes, and then the appellate court is video review of the call, and then there's the Supremes above that. So
I guess
as long as you're making the proper record, I think your decisions should be defendable.
I think one thing to keep in mind is this is, as we have discussed, this is lowering the bar. And we need to be very mindful about the impact that that has. There are people who will find that good and people who will find that not so good, depending on what their own relative position is with how that is implemented. So I've given this a lot of thought in these last days because I want to be sure that we do feel like we have solid ground to stand on as we're hearing these petitions and making our decisions, that we feel like we've got an understanding, not that everyone is going to be completely binary and it's white and black, but that we really feel like we understand what the metrics are and how we decide. So.
Can I spin this another way?
Sure.
Okay, I'm thinking about the guy who wants to build a garage, a detached garage, at the end of his driveway, towards the backyard. The driveway is not pointing towards the back of the yard. It stubs at the yard. He wants to put the garage at the end of his driveway, but there's a tree planted at the end of the driveway. And so in order for him to get his garage, he needs to shift it a little bit towards the property line, but then it encroaches into a setback. And he would argue that it's impractical, because the term is practical difficulty. He might say, it's impractical for me to have to cut down that tree. It's a heritage tree. And when I can simply just shift that garage, 5 feet into the side yard setback. And that's where I think if you think in terms of practicality, and the terminology for practical difficulty is that, it's justified because there's a practical difficulty with meeting the zoning ordinance.
But he would also probably, with economic practical difficulty, say it's going to cost me a bloody fortune to take that tree out of there.
And there's another number of ways it could be looked at.
So,
That's true.
that would, the economic practical difficulty argument could be used there because this is going to be really very expensive for me to have somebody come in and take out this ginormous tree. So, these are hypotheticals, but
yes,
We're going to get a lot
they're
more
like
of them.
nightmares.
Yeah.
So,
I think we run the risk of being less consistent too over time. I just see this as, and that'll vary just with a change of people on this board, without the ambiguity of significant economic injury to consider, but I think will become less so. I don't know what that, from a court standpoint, if it were appealed and they said, well, 8 years ago you approved a similar thing, now you've denied it, and I think we will ultimately become less consistent with it. And again, the ambiguity of significant economic injury is as the kind of the sole part of practical difficulty to me is lowering the bar, I think, and I believe that it will see a shift in how people present their petitions.
it was interesting to see how that the family that wanted the patio and the garage and so on was able to do what was required to get much closer to what was the accepted lot coverage and then therefore make it doable. And I think that was an indication of sometimes you want what you want, and then when you realize you can't have what you want, it's amazing what you can easily live with. It'll be just fine.
Right.
And I think that was the case there where Andrea essentially said they're not going to go for this. Let's see where we can cut back. So that would be, in my view, that would be the perfect solution where people there's a little bit of give, but there's also a real world view of what's going to be acceptable. So
That falls under feasible alternatives, and that's just up to
Right.
us to present those. Be
Yeah.
like, yes, you moved your buffer to the other side of the pond, but you can still do things,
Right.
Don't act like it's one or the
Yeah.
other,
I kind
it's.
of wondered why they wouldn't put it on where people could see the pond and the trees, but then they didn't want to go there. So, all right, is there further, I mean, I don't know.
No.
I just want to be clear before we head to town council with this. Correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, Kathy and Steve, but I get the feeling that you're not supportive of the current definition, and you probably like the existing standard where it's at. Do you have an issue with lowering the bar? Or are you okay, as you just used the example with the Andreoli case, if that played out the way that you think they should play out, what changes are you looking to have?
I don't, what do others?
Because we got to go, I believe, July 15
Right.
to town council, and then there's going to be a decision made, and once that decision's made, it's done. So if y'all have reservations as to changing the bar, if you don't want to change the bar, if you just like the definition that we've provided of hardship, unnecessary hardship, there's no, I mean, we can share y'all's opinion, but now's the time to say it. Because there's not going to be another meeting where the decision's not already made. So
Well, the town council can table the matter.
they can table it, but we need to
They
know
can
that
only
y'all.
table it for 90 days.
Yeah, we need to know if y'all want it tabled. That would be the first thing.
Well, there's another element of this, and this is that, this is, if this change is made, it's a change of the rules that the broader public will not really know about, as much as these have been aired in meetings. The plan commission doesn't have a big, it's not like everybody in town goes to plan commission meetings, nor do they come here.
I don't know, lately there's been a lot there.
I know, it's usually, but I mean, I do think.
For other reasons.
Yes,
Not
yeah.
stuff like this.
Not because of this, no.
So I do think it's important to make sure that people know that the rules, if we're going to change the standard, that the rules are changing. And so they're not surprised. And maybe for most people, they don't care, but there are some people who might.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to be sure that we are absolutely transparent. I don't want anybody to think that somehow this was all done
Yeah.
in the dark of night. And I don't know whether this process will be sufficiently transparent in that regard. Others can decide that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I guess to speak to that, you know, I know I can say for myself, I'm going to call them our frequent flyers, our Matt Prices, our Andreolis, our Todd Rotmans of the world. You know, I've encouraged them, and I know a couple of them have expressed their opinions during the meetings. And I mean, we're obviously doing the proper public noticing at each phase now. You know, whether that is adequate. You know, I mean, to your point, I'm probably not going to be able to reach everybody in Zionsville. There's going to be somebody that inevitably is surprised by this change, but it's. You know, I mean, we're broadcasting on YouTube and Facebook right now, so I mean, it's not like we're trying to hide this. My primary concern is before staff marches forward with something that y'all have concerns with, if you're okay with the bar where it's at, say so. If you want changes, I mean, obviously we've got it, but I believe we originally started this because we all wanted the bar lowered a little bit. But if you're not looking to lower the bar, if you're not looking to approve more variances or have that flexibility, and you're okay with how it currently stands, we need to know.
I'm worried the neighbors and the other people surrounding it also won't understand that it could become a lot easier to have some of these go through that don't usually.
Well, I
That
think
makes
there was a-
sense. There's just a perception that, oh, it's hard to get, you know.
Well, there
Will
was
they
a-
really? And they don't show up and they don't write a letter.
There was a
It's
case.
gonna be the only leg we have to stand on is the neighboring
Well,
use.
you're right, because there was a
Yeah.
case where I think it was lot coverage. It was a 5-acre tract, a very large tract of land. It was lot coverage, or was it primary or secondary or accessory? Maybe the accessory square footage is going to exceed primary. Maybe, I think that's what the case was. But it was a large area, large lot, and there was plenty of room for accessory structures. But because of the unnecessary hardship criteria, the board said we really don't have a choice but to deny the request, because there's lots of land area. There's really no difficulty with meeting the ordinance. And I think at that time I said, well, we could change the standard to practical difficulty, and that would give the board a little more latitude for granting those types of variances. And I think that in part led us on this path of revising the standard.
I worry that you get a little more flexibility one way, but then you end up pushed into things we don't really want, and that neighbors and surrounding people in the neighborhood really wouldn't think would happen will start happening because we don't have a way to say no.
I think you're
You
right.
can still
Mike.
say no, you just have to make your findings according to the definition.
Yeah, but it feels less equal, right, than,
Well, just, to me, with the standard of unnecessary hardship, the way it's defined in the case law, and this definition is what we've recommended to you, I think it would be more likely to have risk of a court of appeals overturning it. If a remonstrator or a petitioner appealed, positive or negative on your decision, if the rule is the property can't be put to a conforming use because of the ordinance, development, if you have a house, you can, if you have a residence, you can still use it as a residence. How can any development standard be granted if unnecessary hardship is the standard? So I think one way to look at this is it's just, I guess, in practice, you're arriving at your decisions. I mean, I don't.
do you think we'll have more people
Well,
annoyed when they feel
no.
like they've got economic
One
injury
way to
and then we
measure-
say no anyway?
One way to measure it
Will that
is
cause
how many,
disgruntled
how many
people
cases,
more
I've only
often?
been here a short time, how many cases have been appealed from any decision in the last year, last 2 years, last 5 years?
Well, there haven't been any.
None.
Yeah, I was about to say I have none. that I'm aware of.
That is,
No,
there's a lot of
but-
factors, but that's an indication
Yeah,
of how the public may react to these changes,
yeah.
because they aren't appealing anything now one way or the other.
And again, I would, even the practical difficulty concept, for me, I continue to say, the addition of the word economic is, for me, seems to signal that we're only talking about what's going to be inconvenient economically, and not other difficulties that could arise from the ordinance with whatever the property or the desire of the person that's wanting to have the variance. And I guess we didn't have economic hardship in the original definition, so adding that word seems to imply something, in my reading, something very different than what we've been using. So, but I don't know. I'm not sure it's going to be easier to sort of interpret as people come, when you say practical difficulty. Hardship is something people can understand. Practical difficulty, that may be a little harder for people to get their brains around.
I'd still advocate for having, taking all the facts together, which is lacking in that practical difficulty. It almost looks like we're looking at only the economics, and it's not that. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. Needs to be in there. And the emphasis on significant economic injury, to me, is also, I find it troubling. We really have struggled less with cases that are outside the village, cases like the one you mentioned where it's 5 acres and they want, more accessory square footage than primary residence, and we haven't really struggled much with that at all. But the ones that we hear about that are either approved or denied are here in the village, where you've got very, very small lots. Coverage means everything. Today's families don't want to live in, a 1,200 square foot house, which might all be all that fits on that lot.
Right.
And so this is where we hear about it. So I guess I'd still advocate that the practical difficulty is what we were struggling with, and having it defined much better than unnecessary hardship. But this to me, I think, needs some bolstering there to make sure that we're not just looking at the economic impact.
Does the second paragraph or second sentence under practical difficulty matter?
Well, yeah, it cannot be self-created. I think that's reasonable. I mean, you know, you could create a scenario where you do have an injury, economic injury. I don't think we want to reward that with approval, so. But it's just that it doesn't,
And it
that
goes
just
on.
makes it look like we're focusing on the economic impact only.
Is it because of the priority of placing that the first part of that definition?
I guess so,
I mean, you could simply
yeah.
swap the second sentence, make that first, and make it, right? Attorney?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense, but there's three elements in that definition. They have to prove that the petitioner has to provide evidence that supports significant economic injury results from the strict application of the zoning ordinance. That injury can't, that anticipated injury can't be self-created, and it's not or, and there can't be feasible alternatives. So the petitioner has to prove all three.
To you?
Yeah, you have to be, to say that the petitioner's met their burden to approve a development standard variance, the petitioner has to provide evidence that supports all three of those.
And I will say too, if you're concerned about whatever the bar is, whatever we decide, if you're concerned about justifying your decision-making or being consistent in your decision-making, staff is still going to provide a report to you. Worst case scenario, I mean, we're not always right. I mean, you can see tonight, sometimes we differ in our opinions, but you will always have talking points. We're going to spend 5 weeks looking through the criteria, and if we believe it's self-created, we'll tell you. And if we believe that it's, you know, whatever the bar is, if we believe it's not got any feasible alternatives, we'll put that in the report. And those criteria will be consistently listed in every petition. You can choose to take in other facts from the petitioner and get to a different conclusion that you're right, but you don't have to be concerned about consistency from staff because we'll be giving you the same criteria and the same talking points across all petitions. All you have to do is just read it and then discuss it, and then that would be justification for your decision making. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm less worried about the village ones, just because I don't think we give enough emphasis to the use and value of the adjacent properties when we take that into account.
I think it's absolutely true.
Because
And
it's
when
not just financial value increasing.
Drainage, it's not all
It's drainage, it's character, it's historic. There's a lot of pieces that go into value other than financial value will go up if your neighbor's house is more expensive.
No, that's
And so
that's an excellent point.
we can lean on that one more than we do
Yeah, they will
now.
say this is not gonna impact my neighbors, it's gonna really add to their house.
Yeah, right.
And it's gonna
Financial
increase the
value.
health of the community, because my pool is gonna make everybody healthier. And I think, sometimes I read those things and I think, seriously, are you gonna open your pool to the village? Everybody can come and swim at your house?
Not everybody
That-
cares just about the financial value, they care about the character value of the community they
And
live in.
I
so
really feel like the
we can
village
pull
probably
on that.
needs, instead of lowering the bar, I really feel like the village needs to, the bar needs to be,
Yeah.
because once we start parsing and, you know.
Unnecessary hardship for the village district, I wonder.
Sorry,
But you,
Can we use both of them?
I don't know.
One
I- I'm
hand
not-
and one another?
That's for
Aren't you
Dan
glad we're doing
and
this?
Mike to talk about.
We worry about the farm issue because that's complicated.
It is, I mean, but
Preserving
I mean,
agriculture is hard.
it's really difficult.
It's really
But it's
difficult.
completely opposite of what we're dealing with in the village.
Right, it's completely opposite
So, I
problem.
mean, we're trying to take something
Yeah.
that's over a broad spectrum, and these are extremes, to use in a
This is like
farm up
swimming
in
in molasses,
Union
isn't it? I
Township
apologize
versus
for
the
that.
village.
I'm just tired.
But it's tough to
True.
apply the same application to both
Let's
extremes.
let our.
I was just,
Legal.
Ms. Henshaw made a really good point. I was just focused on practical difficulties. The petitioner's burden is to provide evidence for, that the approval won't be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, general welfare. That's, provides a lot of discretion. They also have to provide evidence that the use and value of the area adjacent to the property will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. They have to meet that burden, and then they have to prove all three elements of practical difficulties. Significant economic injury, that and that the injury can't be self-created and there can't be physical or feasible alternatives.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of discretion in there.
Yeah, as long as everyone's okay with it, value is not just increasing financial value, but overall value.
Yeah.
So,
But if
that's,
but if I can build an Olympic-sized swimming pool and
everybody's house value.
and all the, all the parking is gonna affect my neighbors, then you can say, well, look, you've done a great job on 1, 2, or 1 and 3, but you failed on 2.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't know what you're gonna take to the town council, but,
Well,
Well, luckily, that's Mike, right? So, I mean, as long as Mike is happy
know
with
what
the
you're gonna take.
discussion and he's
Well-
willing to proceed.
I think that the town council will want to know what you think about this, if you're supportive of this or not. I'm sure that will matter to the
That's
council.
good to
So,
know. I'm not sure
right.
that,
I have concerns
Yeah, I'm not
that
sure
you'll
that
get a
we'll-
lot more pushback on decisions.
I'm not sure that we're all aligned, like, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm hearing enough discussion that it,
If we revise the paragraph or the definition for practical difficulty to list, or in other words, would say, practical difficulty means that the injury cannot be self-created and there cannot be feasible alternatives to requested variance, and that significant economic injury will result from strict application of the zoning ordinance. Change the priority of the language. Would that help at all? Because then it would kind of place those other factors, more prominently and perhaps perceptively as a priority over
I think
economic
it
injury.
helps.
it helps.
I think it helps. It takes the emphasis, because the first thing you read is
Yeah.
that a significant economic injury,
Right.
and then after that, it's like,
Oh, and
okay,
by the
this
way.
is, yeah. So I think it helps to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I could think of some alternatives, so.
Yeah.
I don't know what's feasible. Make the building smaller. There you go.
I think what you said earlier with
So-
Mr. Andreoli's case, that's a good example of you start discussing feasible alternatives, and whether it's on a continued case like that or just with the petitioner at the podium, if I'm their lawyer and I think I'm gonna lose, then I'm gonna start giving away conditions
right,
until we get it down to close enough to,
right.
within what you define as feasible alternatives.
We could list feasible alternatives first, followed by not self-created, followed by significant economic injury.
And to Kathy's point, I mean, if they do everything they can to try and make it as close as they can, it's really appreciated.
Right,
I mean,
right.
good on you for emphasizing that. They give us as much as you can, like you tried.
Well, and I do
rather than
think
just-
Yeah.
that was made with best efforts, and once you begin to think,
Yeah.
this is not gonna fly, so what will I be able to settle for that will fly? And it's amazing you can get there.
Yeah.
So,
If I can't meet it, but I can give you 30% more plants, at least I tried to give you something out of it, right? And make up for the difference in condition you're causing, so.
Is that sufficient input for your,
As long as they understand that we have to interpret it that way, so it doesn't seem like a really low bar.
And I-
Because it reads like one.
if we could, one other little bit of input, if it's convenient and makes sense to you. I think it would have been appreciated to have this discussion earlier upstream, because ultimately, I mean, these are the people who are currently in the role of having to make
Yeah.
these decisions.
Yeah.
Now, so it would have been important, given that there's, I mean, Steve's been involved in this game for a long time, and a lot of institutional knowledge.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
it would have been important to have that.
And I guess that's my fault, because I thought that we had brought this
No,
up to
that's
the
fine.
BZA, and that the BZA seemed to be supportive of
Yeah, but we were
moving
only
from.
looking at it from about 30,000
Yeah,
feet, I
okay.
think, at the time.
We didn't get into the weeds of it,
No.
perhaps.
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
And I think we would all like to have had an easier route to take for a lot of things that ultimately, I think we approved the ones we really felt deserved it. But we really catch a lot of static on some of those too. And we're looking for, couldn't we, at least eliminate some of that. So I don't fault you for looking for another way of doing this, because I think we were wanting to see something that helped us get through some of these without taking the wrath of some of the community.
Well, and I think it was also something that I didn't know, that there were two, essentially, at least two standards, and we were using the more stringent of those. I didn't realize that hardship was like, and that there was something else that was more commonly.
Well, and I thought that was intentional. I thought Zionsville, maybe you still do.
No doubt.
You know, wanted the higher standard.
And
I
Yeah.
think they
Some
do.
point in time-
I think they do.
I'm sure at some
want
point in time that.
the higher
there was
standard,
something,
and I don't
you
think
know.
the perception that we're lowering the bar and that last sentence is necessarily gonna be particularly well
No,
received.
I think we need to be very, and you know, and I still feel like the village in particular, given its sort of historic center of the whole, what people understand about Zionsville, it's like the brick street, you know, you don't want to lower the bar on the brick street, you don't want to lower the bar on the village to a point where it becomes no longer recognizable, and that's concerning. So
It's too tied to identity.
One way to,
That-
one way to think about it though is if the town council approves this as it's written, that's a fresh start for you on development standards cases to start a new, they can't say that 2 years ago you granted this. You could strictly, and even though it may be perceived as a lower standard, you can strictly enforce it on a case-by-case basis.
start setting a standard, so to speak, the low barred standard.
You lower standard, so you have a higher bar to enforce it.
So I think that I would report to the town council that what you're kind of the mixed reviews I'm hearing from the board members on
Yes,
this.
and if they're wanting to talk with us, we're happy to talk with them.
Is that right?
They'd like,
I mean-
yeah, I think we would be.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can
Okay.
we?
Like to hear.
Yes. Or can we talk to them about it? I mean.
Just
Individually, you can certainly
Okay.
lobby, talk to them, to the council members, and then you can relay, if you have anything after this meeting or any thoughts or wording, then just work with staff.
Well, and beyond that.
And you
if
can
they-
go to the meeting.
Yeah.
I don't think,
Maybe they're
that doesn't really sound like a good idea at all. That's a good question.
If they are interested in
They are
feedback,
public.
then they can certainly have, they can
They
call.
can reach out to
call
you.
any of us. Yeah, happily
Okay.
talk with them if they're interested in feedback.
Okay,
I would go to the meeting, but I'm not gonna be in town,
okay,
so.
okay.
Is there a council member who's liaison to planning staff or?
I don't think so. Because I'm not hearing, I'm probably sensing more reservation about changing the standard than support for it.
The language could be better, but the lowering the bar doesn't sit well with anything I've ever heard from anybody's reaction about planning, about BZA, about the town council.
Maybe
They
one-
want a higher bar and a stricter, standard.
Maybe one way to think about it is not rushing into something. Maybe one way to think about it is to be sure that we've given it careful consideration to be able to understand as well we can what the repercussions are gonna be.
I could ask the town council to table the matter for a month, and then we could come back and talk about.
Yeah, maybe have them reach out to us if they want to get our opinions on it. That, we went through it in the planning commission a few weeks ago, and it was, I mean,
It was a very brief conversation.
it was a very, very
watched
brief,
it.
I think we were there and watched it.
Facebook.
Chris and I brought up a few points, and that was the extent of it. I
It
mean,
was like,
well, to no offense to anybody, it kind of is.
yeah.
Before I got on this thing, I really had, it's a completely different ballgame. So, I appreciate allowing the planning commission to look or review this, but this conversation here is a little bit more important than the
Mhm.
planning commission level.
So is that enough for one night?
Would you like me to ask them to table it for another month? They have 90 days in which they have to act.
I think it would be, I guess I would feel better if they tabled it.
Okay.
And I don't know whether if they rework it, it needs to go back to the plan commission and go back. But I think it wouldn't hurt for them to take a little time to be sure that they talk with, they may well have never been to a BCA meeting.
Mhm.
So not that we want all of them here sitting watching, but it may be that they don't really know, you know?
If it's tweaked, it has to go back to Plan Commission.
Right, well, maybe that's, yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, by tweaked, you mean significant
revised.
changes? Revised,
Even
yeah.
by
Just
changing
shuffling
the order of the text,
You think even changing the order of the text with that?
like we described.
That would make sense, that would have to be, but if it's the same wording.
Just-
I'm not exactly sure if it's not a substantial change.
Want to be sure not to do anything.
Well, they have counsel there, Heather Harris is their attorney, and she can weigh in on that.
Okay, so if we're done, if that's good, we can,
Yeah.
do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, everybody.
This was good. All right, thanks for taking the time to noodle all this.